All right, good afternoon. Welcome back to docket number 210515 REO2. This is our reopener in the performance-based regulation framework focused on performance mechanisms. Welcome to everyone. We were here on Friday for a similarly structured event in our first reopener. So welcome back to everyone who was able to participate on Friday, and welcome to everyone who's joining us for today's meeting. If you followed along with Friday's event, you'll notice that now is about the only time I'm going to speak during today's meeting, as we had excellent facilitation by authority staff Peter Kramer. So I'm going to turn it over to him in just a second. We do have an agenda. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review that. Unless there are any administrative matters, which I see Attorney Pace hopping up, and sir, you can be our guinea pig for whether that is on or not.
Does that work? Can you hear me, Commissioner? Can you hear me, Chairman?
I can hear you. I can't tell if the microphone's on.
I'll have Ms. Lupoli help. Thank you.
It's on? Okay, perfect.
Well, thank you for the chance to speak very briefly. One administrative matter is we read motion number 15 ruling very carefully, and thank you for the opportunity. The language says, where appropriate on a limited basis, there can be replacement speakers. And the approach we'd like for permission to use today would be Mr. Chatterjee, for example, for Eversource is our lead speaker. He will be there for the introduction and also for panel 2, which is comprehensive and transparent system planning. He's also our speaker for topic 4, reliable and resilient electric service. However, in order to achieve the goal of making sure we have the right person here who can respond to questions from commissioners, Mr. Kramer, and other docket participants, when, for example, we move to topic 1, which is quality customer service, and all due respect, that's not Mr. Chatterjee's wheelhouse, we're going to ask for permission for our one seat at the table to be occupied by Mr. Belden, who can speak to the issue. Mr. Belden is here, so he meets the requirement of being physically present. And also, once we reach topic 3 with your permission, which is affordable service, again, Mr. Chatterjee is not the expert on affordable service. We propose to have the one Eversource seat be occupied by Ms. Kane, who can answer questions on that topic in a credible and informative way. So with your permission, we'd like to be able to take that approach. We will not be disruptive. The goal, again, is to make sure that we have the right people in the chair who can answer your questions and help the authority achieve its goal of building a record with the information you need. We also do have some other subject matter experts sitting behind them. If they wish to turn around, they can do that. If they feel like there's a very detailed question that a commissioner has, we'll ask for permission. Can we have this person speak up? And we'll see how the authority rules. Is that approach acceptable to the commissioners? We think it's consistent with your ruling on motion number 15, but we'd be happy to hear your feedback.
Thank you, Attorney Pace. I have no issue with that approach. And I think Mr. Kramer will cover conferences with people in his opening remarks. So no issues with that approach.
Great. Thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Anyone with anything further? Attorney Lon, do you want to join us at the table? No problem.
Only cash for parking. I had to go and get cash. My apologies for being
No problem. Is that sign still accurate? I don't know. Not my parking garage. Okay. Anyone with anything further? Okay, then very good. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kramer, please.
Thank you, Chair Gillette, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. And as the chairman mentioned, my name is Peter Kramer with authority staff. And though we had a similar meeting on Friday, as some of you may have seen or participated in, this is still a newer format for us. So we hope that you can all engage in a similar spirit of flexibility and generosity of spirit as we move through this. So we have a lot to discuss on our agenda, so I want to get right into the plan for the meeting. And first, I will address our objectives for the meeting. So our first objective, and Laura, if you can get the slides up to the agenda slide, please, just as we get going here. Thank you. Our first objective for the meeting is to further develop performance mechanisms topics. So we want to discuss with some additional specificity and or modification the proposed performance mechanisms based on the straw proposal, just to ensure that we end up with each priority outcome well supported in this docket. And our second objective is to enable some more open dialogue among participants. We're trying a new format here in order to create more open dialogue as opposed to that presentation and Q&A format that we've taken in other meetings to date. So we think there's some value in that sort of exchange, and we're looking forward to today's discussion for that reason. Okay, so next up, thank you, Laura, our housekeeping items. So as you may know, we are broadcasting this meeting live on Pura's YouTube channel, and the recording of the live stream will also be available on Pura's YouTube channel after the meeting as well. Additionally, the meeting is being transcribed. We have a court reporter with us this afternoon. So for the purposes of the record, whenever you're speaking, if you could please identify yourself and your affiliation the first few times that you speak, so that we can make sure we've got it all straight in the transcript. That would be very helpful. It also helps the folks that are listening in remotely. So related to that, please, when you do speak, please make sure that your microphone is on. If you haven't used the microphones here before, it's indicated when the little green light is on at the base of the microphone. Okay, so for today's meeting, we have our roundtable representatives seated up here in our modified U shape. And this was addressed in the motion ruling that Attorney Pace and the chairman discussed just a moment ago. So we have one representative from each of the participants who asked for a seat to discuss the matters in today's agenda. And as indicated here, they are not in the motion, excuse me, the motion ruling, they're not the only representatives able to speak today. Our seated representatives may confer with other representatives or supporting staff from their affiliated entities. However, we are going to keep the agenda moving along, so we're hoping not to have longer interruptions or conferences that break up the agenda. So we are going to move the agenda along. If you do need to confer, please do so sort of away from the table so that we can keep moving the conversation along. Additionally, other speakers are permitted to be recognized and to speak, as was just addressed in the administrative matters a moment ago. So both if a member seated behind our table representatives wants to come to the microphone, please do so at the appropriate moment. Identify yourself with your name and affiliation. And then if anyone seated in the audience would like to contribute to the discussion, please come up to the podium where Attorney Pace spoke just a moment ago, and we'll recognize you at the appropriate time in the discussion. And again, your name and affiliation to help make sure we've got an accurate transcript today. Okay, next up, we do plan to take a break during our meeting this afternoon, and that is expected at this point to follow our second discussion topic where we review the comprehensive and transparent system planning outcome. And that's approximately around 3:10 this afternoon, but we are going to keep that a little bit flexible depending on how the discussion unfolds. I'm going to next address the discussion format, and then I'll pause for questions to see if anyone has any clarifications or questions about how we'll address the meeting today. So we have 4 priority outcomes to cover today, as you can see up on the slides and as noted in the meeting agenda that was posted earlier this week. They are quality customer service, comprehensive and transparent system planning, affordable service, reliable and resilient electric service. And these are just 4 of the 9 priority outcomes for Connecticut's regulatory framework. We plan to address the remaining 5 at the next technical meeting, which is scheduled for July 10th. And for today's discussion, we prioritize the outcomes for which performance incentive mechanisms, or PIMs, were included in the straw proposal. Wanted to address those with PIMs first, and then we'll get to the other 5 outcomes at the next meeting. So for each discussion topic, each of the four, I'll provide a brief recap of what was included in the straw proposal, just to level set the discussion for anyone who may be joining us for the first time today. And then I'll open the floor up for each of our seated participants to provide a couple minutes of opening comments about the metrics, scorecards, and PIMs associated with the priority outcome. Again, we are hoping to focus on PIMs, though not fully exclude scorecards and metrics, just for the sake of those being some areas that need further development, and we received a lot of comments on in the written comment request. So we'll allow for a couple minutes for each participant to provide some opening remarks about their position relative to the priority outcome as represented with performance mechanisms and PIMs specifically. And then after those opening remarks, authority staff will move to some questions to prompt the discussion among participants. And also per the motion ruling last week, participants are able to ask questions of one another as well in that period. Ms. Karima McDonald is going to be assisting with the discussion facilitation this afternoon as well. So she'll get us started, and the two of us will ask questions throughout the discussion period and kind of help facilitate and call on folks. Okay, I think that's it for what I hope to cover on the discussion format and on our housekeeping items. Does anyone have any clarifying questions about how we will move through our meeting today? No? Okay. I will assume I've been perfectly clear, and then we can get to introductions before we open up our four discussion topics. So I'm going to start with you, Attorney Lon, if you don't mind, and we'll move around the tables here. If you could state your name and affiliation for the record, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Shannon Lon. I'm an attorney and vice president for Connecticut at Conservation Law Foundation.
Good afternoon, Kevin Donnelly, Vice President of Energy Strategy, Policy, and Transformation with Avangrid here on behalf of UI. I'll just take the opportunity to note I do have a number of our subject matter experts with us as well. Seating's a little tight on this side, so they may be coming up to the podium or here if more appropriate.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Oliver Tully. I work on utility regulatory issues at Acadia Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. Moses Rams. I represent Utility Workers Union 470, and I'm also a chief line crew leader at United Illuminating. With me is my colleague and union trustee, Jeff Sear.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Diganto Chatterjee, Interim Senior Vice President of Engineering at Eversource. Thank you.
Hi, I am Ginny Kozlowski, the Executive Director of South Central Connecticut Regional Economic Development Corporation. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Tom Wheel. I'm the Director of Utility Oversight and Regulatory Reform at the Office of Consumer Counsel, and I'm joined by Kara Goldenberg from RMI behind me, who I'm definitely going to be asking for help during this meeting.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Now we'll get our discussion going. And Ms. Lupoli, if you could advance to the next slide, please. I'll start the overview here just with a brief definition of terminology, again, for anyone who's joining us for the first time in the proceeding at this point. When we talk about performance mechanisms, we're referring to three categories of those mechanisms. First, reported metrics, which are characterized as a sort of tracking information or highlighting EDC activities and performance with respect to a particular priority outcome. The second category is scorecards. And with a scorecard, we're simply layering on a benchmark or a target, some sort of a reference point to compare EDC priority outcome performance against something else. That might be historical performance, that might be peer organizations, but the point is to make reference or comparison between a metric and some other benchmark. And then finally, performance incentive mechanisms is our third category of performance mechanisms that we're looking at in this docket. And we also refer to them as PIMs. So you'll hear PIMs a lot today, I'm sure. And here we are then tying a EDC priority outcome and the performance against such to a financial incentive and or a penalty. So taking somewhat of a progression of from tracking to comparison to then also tying a financial incentive or penalty to performance against a measured unit. So just wanted to acknowledge that before we get too far underway. And Ms. Lupoli, if you go to the next slide, I'll start with an overview of our first priority outcome discussion topic today, which is for quality customer service. And in the straw proposal, we included a PIM that focused on the interconnection timelines for distributed energy resources, level 1 projects, referring to those smaller projects of, I think it's 25 kilowatts or below. And we also included proposals for a DER interconnection scorecard for level 2 projects, larger projects, to again look at the interconnection timelines. And 2 additional scorecards, one related to customer satisfaction and another related to customer inquiries. And then finally, with reported metrics, the straw proposal included tracking many of the existing customer service metrics that the EDCs report and adding a comprehensive and accurate customer communications metric looking at how customers are informed of the right payment plan or options for their bill when they contact the company. So this is the portfolio of performance mechanisms that was proposed in the straw proposal. And we wanted to open the discussion targeting the quality customer service, the PIM, around DER interconnection process. So Laura, could you go to the next slide, please, where we have a recap of some of the characteristics of that performance incentive mechanism. The objective here for this PIM is to improve the DER interconnection process for those projects, those smaller projects, 25 kilowatts or below, to improve the customer experience and facilitate a greater deployment of DERs statewide. This would be comprised of 2 submetrics, the annual or the average annual number of business days for both the pre-construction phase of a project and the post-construction review. And then likely data inputs, we expect that this information is largely already available given that the EDCs are currently facilitating their own interconnection processes. And finally, for target setting and or incentive considerations, the straw proposal contemplated a symmetrical incentive and a penalty. When we say symmetrical, that means both an upside and a downside opportunity for the company based on performance. Also, we identified the likelihood for potential greater incentive in order to provide more carrot for overperformance or for exemplary performance for the EDCs. We proposed a narrow deadband, which in the interest of, again, terminology, that's a level above and below the target performance where the incentive or the penalty would not apply to account for some variation in performance. And then fourth and finally, the straw proposal contemplated, though did not establish specific dollar amounts, that those incentives or penalties could be tied to specific dollar amounts in the future. With that, I'm just going to ask Ms. Lupoli to also put on the screen the next slide, which gives more of a snapshot of some of the text or an adaptation of some of the text from the straw proposal. Though I think maybe for the purposes of the discussion, I'm going to ask you, sorry, Laura, to go back one more. We can leave it on this slide for pausing here to move on to some opening statements from our various participants. So I'll start just in sequential order. No particular rhyme or reason this time. Attorney Wheel, can you go first for our opening comments on this quality customer service PIM, please?
Sure. Yeah, we filed comments in the most recent comment round, I think with our thoughts on the straw proposal, where the straw proposal landed on this PIM. As I recall, we generally agreed with the straw, where the straw proposal recommendations were. I think I think our overall thought is, I think it's kind of universal for most of the things we'll talk about today, is that it's kind of setting the details is going to matter on this one. So we weren't sure we were ready to say with certainty that it makes sense that there should be greater upside potential than downside. I think it matters from our perspective sort of what the inputs are and the kind of specifics of what exactly is being measured. I'd say the same thing about the deadband. I think that the deadband, like the idea of the deadband makes sense to us, but determining what the scope of the deadband is, I think would depend on kind of trying to isolate like the natural volatility in the data we're looking at to kind of try to use the deadband as a way to filter out that the effect of that volatility that's sort of outside of the utility's control. And same with the defined dollar amounts. I think all of the specifics about how to design this are going to depend a lot on what exactly the data looks like. So I think that's generally the overview of our perspective on this one.
Ms. Kowalski, would you like to comment?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Pardon me, Andy Belden, Vice President of Solar Programs at Eversource. So this is one that's near and dear to my heart, since my team is in charge of the front half of the process that would be measured here, the pre-construction parts of this PIM. So generally, we're supportive of this PIM. It's aligned with national best practices. This is generally structured similar to a PIM that Hawaiian Electric Company uses currently. Importantly, it measures elements that are largely under our control. Both the pre-construction approval and the post-construction approval are internal processes to Eversource. We feel that's a appropriate area for a PIM. The benchmarks are going to be based on, as we understand it, previous EDC data. So we'll be able to show over time and show up at our next rate case with the data on the last 3 or 5 years, and hopefully use that as to set the deadband and also some of the other aspects of this PIM. Importantly, this covers about 95% of the interconnections that we see in a given year. So the vast majority of our solar customers would be affected by this PIM. I think, in alignment with Attorney Wheel, this is a good start, but there's a number of details that we'll all have to work through over the coming months and years to figure out the specifics of how this is going to work. And I would encourage us to look beyond just the folks who are in this room or participating in this docket. The solar industry hasn't really been engaged in this docket, so it might be an opportunity to work with the interconnection working group to help work through some of the particulars and specifics of this PIM, as well as the level 2 scorecard. Areas where we see detail, and I recognize that we are in a process and we are going to get there, but the scale of the PIM, the amount of money that's going to be at stake either on the upside or the downside, that'll be critically important. And from our perspective, we understand that this is a priority for Connecticut. It's certainly a priority for me. This is the most important thing that I work on. But we also have to acknowledge that this affects about 15,000 customers a year, whereas we have 1.3 million customers in its entirety. Making sure we get the PIM right based on that is important. Timelines and tolling are another piece that's important. For instance, do we stop the clock or should we stop the clock when we have, say, an ERP event and our meter folks get pulled off their regular duties and have to go work on storm restoration duty? So things like that are important considerations that we need to work through, again, as a group. I think we also need to make sure that we're establishing consistency between the EDCs Both Eversource and UI are on the Power Clerk platform, but I'm not sure that we're necessarily measuring everything precisely the same way, but I think that would be important. And I think the final piece, we had suggested that it'd be worthwhile to, as we're calculating the PIM and the results, to throw out outliers both on the high side and the low side. We think that may support some administrative simplicity, because we may have strange cases where, say, a solar installer goes bankrupt and we have holds and things like that. So you might have extended timelines, but also throwing out projects kind of on the low side could prevent gaming from an EDC that chose to do so. So being able to define the universe of projects that count, I think, is another important consideration. But by and large, we're encouraged by this PIM and the structure based on what we've seen so far, and we're looking forward to working with the stakeholders to refine it going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Belton. I didn't mention this. I said a couple minutes earlier, and this is no commentary on your remarks, but just as a reminder, we're trying to stick to about 2 minutes for your opening remarks, and I will interject if I need to, just to keep things moving along. So anyway, thank you. Not a commentary on your remarks. Mr. Rams?
Moses Rams, no comment at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Oliver Tully at Acadia Center. We strongly support the use of a performance incentive like this to accelerate the deployment of distributed energy resources, especially as Connecticut works to achieve its climate and clean energy goals. We echo some of the open questions that remain that Attorney Wheel mentioned around the details of the components, and to make sure that the performance incentive is structured in a way that's appropriately tuned to motivate actions that may not have happened without the incentive. And to that point, related to this PIM, but also to all of the PIMs that may be developed, we'd just like to emphasize the importance of building in a process for learning and flexibility over time, recognizing the need for stability within the performance incentives, allowing for an opportunity to assess the effectiveness of the various targets or incentives or penalties as work is underway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Donnelly for UI. Similar to what I think we just heard, very aligned with our colleagues here at Eversource and what Attorney Tully just mentioned as well. Generally, this seems like it's a good thing, and it's a point of frustration for customers who are going through the interconnection process to have delays. One key aspect, however, though, is the way this was defined in the straw, very importantly, falls mostly within the direct control of the EDCs and our ability to work with the pre-construction, the initial application review, and then the post-construction. So just caution that when we think about how something like this from a PIM would be set up, any of that post-construction review process needs to recognize the developer has a lot of work to do on their end. And when those steps are taken and finalized and information comes back to the utility is when the clock should start. Quick comment, I particularly like what Andy said, I forget, sorry, your last name, over at Eversource, was around an ERP event. Our core obligation is to provide safe and reliable service. There might be times when we absolutely have to do an all hands on deck, and that's the right thing to do for all of our customers across the system. And that's something that should be taken into consideration when evaluating the mechanism, how you measure it, how you respond to it.
Thank you.
Hi, again, Shannon Lawn with Conservation Law Foundation. Just a few preliminary thoughts. So first of all, I'm really interested in seeing this data. I do not have a clear sense of how long the interconnection process currently takes. I'm especially interested in whether there are disparities on where delays are currently occurring, thinking in particular like between wealthier areas, low-income areas, environmental justice communities, and so on. So very interested in seeing that data. Just one comment on the mechanism structure. I think it absolutely is right in focusing on how the interconnection process can be more streamlined and expedited. I do wonder about the more qualitative lens here. I know just anecdotally, we've had community members, churches, residences reach out and express frustration with the process of getting their solar systems interconnected. I know in particular, people have highlighted issues with reaching a responsive person at the company and getting their questions answered, getting their concerns addressed. And so I do wonder within the mechanism structure, if we can account both for expediting the process and, reducing the number of days that's required, but also making sure that, this is done equitably and that the companies are responsive to customer concerns, that there's like a designated phone number they can call and reach someone. And if there's a way of incorporating responsiveness to those concerns and getting them satisfactorily addressed, I think it would be great to incorporate that as well.
Attorney Lund. And I don't know that you had a chance to introduce yourself earlier. Would you mind introducing your name and your affiliation, please?
Yeah, sure. My name is Garrett Sheehan. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce, and happy to be here. No comment on this issue.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Donnelly, you look like you want to amend something that you said, or do you want to add?
We'd love to be able to have another comment based on.
Let's hold on that for just a moment. You can certainly ask the question of Ms. Lawn or open that discussion in just a moment. I want to thank everyone for their opening remarks on the PIM noted up here. And Ms. McDonald, do you want to get us started with a question or a discussion prompt here for the group, and we'll open it up?
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. In listening to the opening remarks from participants just now, let's get into the meat of the matter here, and I'm hoping I can get some answers to these pointed questions. First, how do we structure the PIM using both the post and pre-construction metrics? Should we be adding the pre-construction and post-construction intervals together for a total number of days? And how should we total the number of days or threshold? Should we establish thresholds for both pre-construction and post-construction? That was a mouthful, so we'll take it step by step. I do have a few more questions.
Does anyone want to comment on the structure question about looking at the two pieces, pre-construction, post-construction, and how we might structure combining those or weighting them, what those look like in concert with one another as a part of a PIM here? Mr. Belton, it looks like you want to.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think our initial proposal was that we would amalgamate those into one number, because ultimately that's what the customer experiences in terms of the efforts that are put in by Eversource. So, we did think that that was kind of the simplest way to approach this. And one of the things that we want to encourage when we're developing these is simplicity, so the customers can understand it, and folks who are kind of outside the stakeholders that are deep in the nitty-gritty of these PIMs can also understand it. So amalgamating both the post-construction and the pre-construction into one number, and then considering that the threshold and what we're measured on was our proposal.
All right, thank you, Mr. Belden.
Anyone else want to be heard? Mr. Donnelly?
Sure, I'll just piggyback exactly what we just heard a moment. I think that makes sense. The customer experience is really important in that interaction for how they feel and work through their process end to end, and whether or not that's at a satisfactory pace. One thing I would highlight is that we don't control the volume of applications that would come in. And at any point in time, that might be one that comes in this week. It could be 1,000, could be 10,000, who knows? We just don't have a way to control what comes into the company. So this aspect of how do we best provide timely response to work our way through to give the best experience possible does come with a need for any incremental cost for us to staff to that level. however the PIM is defined. So if we define to a certain level and threshold of performance, we would need to have the ability to have the timely recovery of those prudently incurred costs to manage to that level. And then we can say, are we achieving it? Yes, no. Are we getting to the level of performance that is required of us and that we're going to be held accountable for?
So, okay. Mr. Donnelly, based on those comments, how soon after an application is submitted does the company respond?
That is a great question, one that I'm not in a position to answer, but we can get you that information and be more than happy to provide it. It can vary and fluctuate, I think, by what I just described a few moments ago, the volume that does come in, the workload that that group is dealing with as they are dedicated, but not fully dedicated in some respects. They might have to flex and do some other system-related work if that's what we need them to accomplish for, again, the overall safe, reliable operation of the system. So I'm happy to get that for you, and hopefully I can get an answer before we finish today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Belden?
I'm happy to provide kind of updated numbers from Eversource, and I'm generally confident that EY's numbers are similar. So on the first half, that pre-construction from when a completed application is sent to us to when we approve it, we're averaging about 12 days right now, and that can fluctuate based on volume. It goes up and down. We've had it as low as 8 or 9. We've had it in the last year, maybe up to 17 or 18 days. On the post-construction, so that is measured from when an installer completes all the paperwork, and we also have the wiring inspector call in that they've completed their tasks from the local government to us installing the meter and then eventually providing permission to operate. That's on a similar timeline. Right now, it's about 10 to 12 days. So, and these are things that our teams track very closely. I have a Power BI dashboard that I look at every morning to see where we are in terms of our performance related to that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Belden. So the next question I'm gonna throw out there is, and Attorney Wheel, you brought this up, so I'm putting you on the spot. What is a reasonable deadband to include?
Trying to think about an answer that's in any way satisfying. I don't know that. I mean, because I think I don't know. I don't know the data, but I think that the answer is going to depend on the data. I think in my view, like conceptually, the purpose of the deadband again would be to allow there to be a certain amount of wiggle room one way or the other in the level of performance that the company is being held to. So the deadband would be out of recognition that holding the company to a specific, set in stone level of performance might not make sense for particular reasons. And those reasons, as identified by the data, would, in my mind, derive the calculation of the deadband. But I'd certainly welcome anyone who knows more about the actual data we're talking about here to provide a better answer to that.
Or maybe another way to tackle that question is, if not, what is an appropriate deadband? What might be an appropriate way to determine, what that deadband would look like?
And I would say there's some natural variability in the data. There's noise day to day, week to week, month to month. So we, from our perspective, we would want that deadband to encompass that natural variation, so that anything that we're seeing on the time scale that we're measuring is indicative of real changes in our performance. So as I said here today, I can't tell you like how we would calculate that, what that would look like, but I think that is probably a reasonable way to approach it, going and making sure we're not just capturing noise and either rewarding or punishing the EDC based on that. And that's indicative of real progress being made in one direction or another. And I think that will take analysis. And I think we had expected that, based on the direction from the authority, we would come, in our next rate case with some definitions around what these numbers are. And that would be debated and discussed and adjudicated. So that was how I was imagining we'd help define some of those things.
Thank you, Mr. Belden. And
And nothing, Kevin Donnelly for UI, nothing really all that different probably to say or add. I like the way Attorney Wheel said it, it's sort of like, it depends. I think we got to see some data, understand what those bands look like for performance, and then what would be an appropriate financial incentive or penalty that goes with it. It notes in the straw that it would likely be more positive than negative. How that plays forward, what that looks like, is still, I think, to be determined with either additional discovery or data gathering on performance to get an understanding of really what are you looking to drive for an outcome. How many customers are impacted? Mentioned 15,000 out of 1.3 million over at Eversource. I can get the same number. I just don't have it readily available. It's not my area of expertise, but looking to get as much conversation flow as we can.
thank you, Mr. Donnelly. And I'm glad you brought up what is the outcome we're trying to get to. In the straw proposal, one of the objective stated there was to have greater deployment statewide. In trying to determine the upside or downside structure of the PIM, should more weight be placed on the post-construction to meet that objective?
I mean, I guess I think the customers experience the entirety of the experience, or whether it's pre-construction or post-construction. I could imagine there might be a little more frustration if you have your PV system on your roof and you're ready to get it turned on and you're waiting longer than you'd expect. But from our perspective, both of these elements are critically important for us to be paying attention to and making sure that we're investing in, so we're moving customers through that process.
So educate me there, Mr. Belden. Not every application gets to PTO or permission to operate. So the level of frustration there that you mentioned would perhaps only be realized at the post-construction phase. No?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I'm not sure the fraction of projects at this point in my head that get approval to interconnect, but don't actually go through and are constructed. So there would be a misbalance there that we would, as I'm thinking about it, we would need to account for, since we are, obviously providing that service. Well, one thing that we could do is exclude projects that don't even go to PTO. So just look at all the projects that complete the entire cycle. That might be one way to address that specific problem.
Okay.
Or imbalance.
If I could add, Kevin Donnelly here with UI. So the way, I know maybe the word construction is an interesting word to include, as opposed to say what really is it on the EDC side? It's like an initial screen and review. What needs to happen into our system to enable this interconnection to happen? And then on the back end, when the developer has done their thing and gotten all the way through it, what does that as-built inspection and testing prove or show? Are we able to finalize and have the customer energize on their end? So that's the construction aspect is maybe a little bit interesting, as the EDC is not directly in that process, but it's an initial screen to enable it, and it's a post to allow for the interconnection to actually happen.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly.
May I ask a clarifying question to the EDCs? When you receive that initial application, has the applicant already received all necessary permits and approval, or does that happen in between 1 and 2 here?
So that generally depends on the kind of strategy of the specific installer. So many times they'll submit an application to us, and meanwhile they're also going through the local government permitting process. But having those permits for the level 1 projects is not a requirement or a prerequisite for receiving approval from us. It is, municipal approval is a requirement. They have to have a wiring inspection in order to get a meter and then go on to receive permission to operate from us, though.
And along those lines, there are a number of requirements that need to happen, including third-party installers who aren't even regulated or part of the process, who is going to be the solar, say, rooftop installer. We have requirements for what's required upfront and then what's required on the back end to do the as-built inspection and testing. We don't obviously control what they do in terms of the level of, I guess, timeliness of that response or how thorough they are in what they submit. So that sometimes can also be a reason why a project might get hung up, frustrating to the end customer, because we might be that point of interaction on the EDC side, but rather it's an incomplete application for the things you mentioned, the permitting, the testing, the various aspects that are required.
Mr. Donnelly, during that process, who is responsible for communicating with the customer? When you don't have all the things that you just mentioned, from permits and all the other requirements?
Sure, subject to check that I'm speaking a bit out of turn here. I believe and let's go through an example. If a customer has had a third-party installer install all of the solar rooftop, let's use that as our example, and they believe that it's ready to go, and all that is left and required is for the EDC to do their aspect, their part, that it can get interconnected. It would be the customer looking for the EDC to communicate. And we would say, as an example to that customer, we have not received all of the required documentation or required information from your developer. So you need to go speak to your developer to get the necessary information submitted. I believe in my case, it would be the customer always looking to the EDC, even though the EDC isn't the primary, say, responsible or accountable party for compiling or completing that work, and welcome some conversation from Eversource as well.
Yeah, and this has been an area where we've evolved over time. I'd say previously we looked to the installer to be the agent of our customer, and so we would mostly just communicate back and forth with the installer. And frankly, we heard from some of our customers that we seemed to be kind of behind the curtain and not really engaged. So over the last year and a half, we've steadily increased the number of communications that we have directly with the customers. So right now, as part of our Power Clerk portal, which is kind of the workflow engine for this entire process, we have a series of communications that go out directly to the customer, apprising them of kind of where they are in the process, kind of typical timelines for things that happen within the process, so they can better know what to expect. I would say the most of the inquiries that we get directly are from installers who are trying to figure out how to navigate specific problems that they might be having. But we do also have customers that contact us directly as well.
Thank you, Mr. Belding. Final question for this topic here. What topics related to the priority outcome have not yet been addressed in the proceeding or need more attention? Yes.
It's not Moses Rams Utility Workers Union. It's not really an answer. It's more of a question. I understand the need for speed, but our concern is how they're built safely, not so much how fast they're done, so that people that have to work on these things are sure that it's a safe process as well for the workers. Understanding the timeline, but we have to understand keeping it safe as well.
Mr. Rams, isn't that consideration taken into the time it takes that Mr. Belding referred to as the pre-construction to the post-construction?
That's not my wheelhouse, but I know that at the end of the day, when the line workers that I represent have to go out, or the meter people or anyone, I just want to make sure that in this process, as we're trying to meet deadlines, we understand that you may be putting people in harm or at risk if it's not safely built. That's just a concern that I want to add to it. So irrespective of the timeline, it has to be done correctly and safely. It's just a comment.
And if I could echo that, I think it's a critically important question. We do have our meter techs that go out from time to time, and they do find something that is concerning, and making sure that our staff always knows we're expecting you to work safely, and no financial penalty, no PIM should ever override that. So that's a critical piece of this, and absolutely it should be a consideration for everything that we do.
So how should safety be included in this objective,
I-
PIM objective?
Yeah, I think having clear guidelines that all of our folks who are in the field understand that like they can press the button and stop the clock. If they find something that is troubling and concerning, that they don't want to install a meter, they don't want to touch the system. They have clear pathways for like I just said, stopping the clock to make sure that we are not penalized for raising concerns and issues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chatterjee, did you want to add something to the
Yeah,
discussion?
I just wanted to make sure the question was on what aspects of this priority outcome. And if the priority outcome is focused on quality customer service, it includes a level 2 scorecard as well, right? And those level 2 projects are the vast majority of the solar megawatt hours that would drive reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Those solar projects will require substantial amount of grid investments. And those grid investments recently in a new latest straw proposal for non-residential solar projects was directionally in the right place. However, REO1 and REO2 are silent on how those investments would be funded. There is no connection in REO1 and REO2, likely upwards of $300 million of investments for level 2 ground-mounted solar projects. So I just wanted to make sure that while we're talking about quality customer service, we are focused on 15,000 customers for rooftop solar. There is a massive elephant in the room with being able to enable greenhouse gas emission reductions, and that's from ground-mounted solar. And I just don't understand how any of the REO1 revenue shortfalls or indexing based on inflation pays for massive acceleration of solar, which we all know will far outpace inflation. So how is that funding going to happen either through REO1 or in REO2? Likely not, because the PIM isn't focused on ground-mounted solar. It's simply focused on residential solar. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. I think it's that's a topic that is not immediately at hand here, but I'm glad that you pointed to the scorecard. And Ms. McDonald's question was to sort of broaden it back to the full portfolio of performance mechanisms that I mentioned at the outset here. And before we go back to that, because I do want to spend a couple minutes to see if participants would like to comment further on any of the scorecards or metrics for the quality customer service priority outcome. But I wanted to pick up briefly on a comment that you made earlier, Ms. Lon, or Attorney Lon, excuse me, regarding the qualitative aspect of interconnection and customer experience there, to see whether you or any other participants around the table felt that there's still a gap there in being able to understand the level of customer service and experience from that qualitative angle. We do have, Ms. Lupoli, if you could go back just one slide for me, please. Another number of other metrics and scorecards here that may also encapsulate some of those opportunities for customer complaint or inquiry. But I wanted to just see if you had a specific thought or recommendation on capturing that qualitative aspect of the customer experience, or if others around the table did. So I'll start with you if you.
Yeah, thank you. I would need to look back over the details of the customer satisfaction scorecard. I think potentially that it could be like incorporated by reference in this PIM, and that could get at it. I do think that there could be some questions specific to interconnection that it might be worth doing a little bit more of a deep dive and thinking about whether there are particular questions or attributes that need to be captured in the context of customer satisfaction, like specific to interconnection. So I think I'd need to confer with others and give that a little bit more thought. But those are my initial thoughts on the matter.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to pick up on that qualitative aspect of the customer experience? Okay, if not, I do want to check before we move on to our next discussion topic, to see if anyone around the table would like to comment on the scorecards and reported metrics that are also listed up here on the screen, which the straw proposal contemplated. Yeah, could you please introduce yourself and your affiliation?
Absolutely. My name is Jared Lawrence. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Customer Officer at Eversource. And so I am operationally responsible for each of the scorecard items and metrics that are listed in the straw proposal. So given the limit on time, I'll just be very brief here. First of all, I'd like to say that Eversource wholly supports the list of metrics. I think that they strike the right level of transparency. These are metrics that we focus on internally for our data center management philosophy. I think where the work really needs to be done is on the methodology side as well as the target setting side. So from a methodology perspective, we spend a lot of time working with not only peer utilities, but also J.D. Power to make our metrics as comparable as possible. So to the extent that there's temptation to try and change the survey methodologies and the questions that are used, I just want to caution that could start to undermine some of the comparability that we've baked into our current extensive Voice of the Customer program. Secondly, I do also want to point out from a target settings perspective for the scorecard items that that benchmarking is particularly challenging in this Connecticut environment because there are a number of outlier policies here. Now, I'm not questioning the value of those policies. I think we support those policy objectives, but there are things that are required, for example, in the call center experience that add to average handle time, that require us to offer up a review officer, for example, that undermine what a call center practitioner would consider to be best practices, and also create that climate of escalation. And so we would want to really de-emphasize benchmarking for target setting and really focus more on if there's a desire to attach targets to those metrics, baselines that are established over a period of time. And traditionally, we've focused on 3-year baselines from that perspective. For the complaints metric, again, we focus on, put an intense operational focus on complaints as learning opportunities. We apply our human performance methodology to those. What we find is that only a small fraction of those complaints are truly justified, meaning that there was a situation where Eversource made an error in a decision or in the application of a policy. And so we would very much like to see the scorecard and any targets associated with that focus on a justified criteria related to that. And that would really have two main criteria. The first being that Eversource was given a chance to resolve the inquiry, i.e. the customer didn't go directly to the EOE, for example, to raise their issue. And then also that we objectively, it's determined that we made an error, and it wasn't just a situation where, for example, we conferred with EOE and decided that even if the policies were administered accurately, that in a special customer situation, it was appropriate to make a concession. The last point I want to mention here, given the limit on time, is that there's a focus on 3 customer groups: residential, commercial, and industrial. Our industrial customers are subject to different communications channels and are often assigned an account executive. Those account executives are and essentially manage that relationship, and we have different account executive surveys for those. So the methodologies that we would apply to residential and commercial customers would not apply in the current environment to industrial.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Does anyone want to respond to the broader prompt here to add on scorecards or metrics, or ask questions of each other? I know, Mr. Donnelly, you had wanted to respond to something that our Attorney Lon mentioned earlier, or has that been covered at this point?
Yeah, thank you again, Kevin Donnelly here for UI. I think probably covered through the conversation of my previous thought, but I did have a few things just to mention here as well. And we talked about pushing the button a little while ago out in the field if it's not safe. Perhaps just as we consider timeframes, we should give consideration to instances where that is appropriate. I suppose in that as-built inspection and testing, it would provide for a shutdown phase, because I think that was what the straw had commented. Basically, you go out, you find something that's no good, you shut it down. That's your measurement criteria for the days for review. And then it gets resubmitted to the installer and they take appropriate action. Also, just with respect to the other scorecards and metrics, generally overall, I think similar agreement from what I understand with what we just heard from Eversource, that more or less okay with what we're trying to gather. A lot of this data is currently already reported. It's one consideration, maybe just to try to further understand the granularity of some of that data, if it's different from what we have, and what that would mean for that value proposition between what the perceived benefit may be of gathering it versus the cost to implement and to track it as well. Specifically, just also understanding the EOE complaints and the flow of traffic that goes to EOE, whether or not we are in the position to actually see that and control it. The customer can reach out at any time if they choose, if it doesn't come through the company. And that's the piece that we want to make sure we better understand. A quick pause, if you don't mind, just to ask my colleague, Ms. Palella, who is here, if there's anything further from the company.
Thank you. Ms. Palella? At the podium, please. Could you state your name and affiliation, please?
Thank you. Tracy Palella. I'm the Vice President of Customer Service for the Connecticut, Massachusetts operations. I would echo what Eversource and Mr. Donnelly has shared so far in reference to the scorecards that we talk about in customer satisfaction and customer inquiries. I think it will be important to compare and contrast what Eversource has been doing thus far compared to what UI does as far as the way the surveys are conducted. We have discovered that, year after year, it is important to make sure that we're measuring it in a consistent way. For example, I know over the past years that UI made a change, and so some of the customer satisfaction surveys were done mostly via email versus phone call. It made a difference in the results. We're also doing now a lot of self-service surveys after self-service. That makes a difference, and also the questions that are asked. So it will be important to understand how have we been collecting information related to surveys, and how will we plan to going forward, and how do we compare across the utilities?
Thank you, Ms. Palella. Okay. Not seeing further.
One other clarifying question.
Certainly. We're going to move on after this topic to our next discussion topic, but Attorney Lon, please.
I'll keep it very brief. I'm just wondering, from the standpoint of a customer who's seeking to interconnect, how they check on the status of their project. I believe the companies have walked through the software you use internally, and I'm wondering if the customer has access to that for their project, or whether that's a capability that would be possible with the software. If you could speak to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to the specifics for Eversource, but at this time, there is no way to log into our Power Clerk portal and check yourself. But what we do is send regular emails to the customer, letting them know where they are in the process. And so we'll even say if we issued permission to interconnect, which is the step after we've approved their application, and we haven't heard from their installer in 60 days, we will send out a communication to the customer saying, hey, we haven't forgotten about you. And reminding them, where they are in the process. So that's been our approach. Certainly, there are investments we could make to have a more online experience, but at this point, we've found that email cadence has been well received by our customers.
All right, very well. Thank you for the discussion on our quality customer service priority outcome and PIM. Next up, we are going to move on to discuss the next priority outcome, which is comprehensive and transparent system planning. Thank you, Ms. Lubley. So we've advanced the slides here to show the proposed portfolio of performance mechanisms for this priority outcome. And the first thing that you will likely notice here, if you haven't read the straw proposal, is that there are comparably no scorecards and reported metrics proposed here. And the reason for that is that the authority described in the straw proposal that this outcome is substantively advanced in our estimation through the third reopener docket regarding distribution system planning, or integrated distribution system planning rather. So that is sort of the mechanism by which we see this priority outcome largely being supported, though there are certainly connections among all three of these reopener dockets in between distribution system planning and REO2, and also to REO1, dealing with revenue adjustment mechanisms. That said, we did highlight in the proposal to incorporate the non-wire solutions shared savings mechanism, and consider that as a part of the performance mechanism portfolio for this particular priority outcome. So with that, I'll describe on the next slide, please, Ms. Lupoli, just briefly some of the characteristics of that shared savings mechanism, where the objective is really to incentivize the EDCs to transparently identify and evaluate and select non-wires solutions when beneficial, and that the structure of that shared savings mechanisms are to split the net benefits from a project where the project realizes savings to share those 25% with customers and 25% with the company and 75% with customers. And the inputs for this particular shared savings mechanism largely live in the other dockets where this matter has been developed and are just continuing to be developed. But those are the costs and benefits of the various solution alternatives that are being considered. And with respect to the specifics of this shared savings mechanism, as I just mentioned, that has been developed and is under development in dockets number 171203 REO7 and the non-wire solutions decision that's been made there, and 240808, where the non-wire solutions process is being established in greater detail. Let's pause on this slide then to take some opening comments from our participants at the table. And just as a matter of starting somewhere differently, I'm going to put someone on the spot. And Mr. Tully, are you prepared to open us up on this shared savings mechanism, please?
Sure, happy to. Oliver Tully at Acadia Center. We're really excited to see the development of the non-wire solutions program. And we think that it will be really transformational in the deployment of non-wires projects in Connecticut. And we think that it could be a model for other states in the region and around the country to follow. So we're very supportive of this PIM, and we think it could go a long way to making sure that the non-wires program is effective. And we also want to acknowledge that we're looking forward to more conversations in REO3 to develop more of the scorecards and metrics to meet this particular objective around transparent distribution system planning, to make sure that whatever processes end up getting developed are in fact accessible, transparent, and productive. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to, I guess it's my left, your right. Mr. Rams, would you like to comment on this, PIM?
No comment this time.
Okay. Let's keep moving around the horseshoe in that direction, please.
I have a lot to say about this, so bear with me.
I'm gonna keep you to the approximately 2 minutes
sure.
here.
So we had said right from the get-go, right, that when you have a PIM, you should have a target. Before you set a target, you have to have some operational history, so you understand what's good, what's bad, what's excellent, right? And before you have an operational history, you have to actually make investments into it. We jumped to the last step. I mean, I respect Mr. Tully, what he just mentioned, but imagine taking a test that you're not allowed to prepare for. This just completely, this one, as well as the reliability and resilience PIM, just completely flouts the design principles that we discussed right from the get-go. There is no operational history of any non-wire solution in Connecticut. In fact, the 2 pilots that we proposed were rejected by PURA. We've resubmitted those pilots, After Pura approves it, hopefully, it'll take us a few years to construct it. After construction, it'll take us a few years to actually measure the benefits. I don't understand, what are we measuring here? What is the benefit here? Is it benefit of a certain amount of distribution capital going to non-wires? Is it an amount of non-wires alternative savings? And how would we determine that? There's no benchmark, there's no baselining. So now EDCs are in a place where we will have a financial penalty associated with an arbitrary benchmark. The second point I'll make is this is ditto from REO3. It already requires us to have a shared savings in the 25%, 75% split. It already requires us to go through a non-wires alternative screening for every project over $250,000. So why are we duplicating this and calling it an upside PIM when it's really, in disguise, a forcing function, which I see that as a penalty-only PIM? If the objective is to penalize a utility regardless of non-wires alternative is selected or not, then let's articulate that. Let's say that that is the objective, but let's not duplicate the order that specifically says a list of things that the EDCs are now responsible and have to do.
Mr. Chatterjee.
With that, I'll conclude.
Thank you. You're just at a little over your 2 minutes. I'm gonna stop you there. Thank you. Ms. Kozlowski, do you want to add here?
Sorry. Jenny Kozlowski, I have no further comments on this portion.
Thank you. Attorney Will?
Yeah, thanks, Tom Wheel for the Office of Consumer Counsel. I think I'll start maybe in response to Mr. Chatterjee, the second part of his remark about this being duplicative of the, I think, Mr. Chatterjee, you might have said REO3, but you meant REO7, the original non-wires docket. And I think we can maybe take responsibility for that, for that perception, because I think we identified back in 2105-15, the original PBR docket. Part of the process there was sort of to determine what performance-based mechanisms already existed within our regulatory framework. And this one did, to Mr. Chatterjee's point, that this was a mechanism that was developed in the final decision in 17-1203 REO7. And we've been recommending throughout this docket and the underlying one that it just be included, essentially just to be grouped in. We're here designing performance incentive mechanisms to ensure that that performance incentive mechanism, when it is finalized, meets the same sort of criteria and design imperatives that have been developed here. So we don't see it as doubling as much as just taking the notion that already exists from that final decision and just sort of ensuring that it's sort of in the same bucket of consideration as the other PIMs that are being developed throughout this program. I also, I was a little confused. I've reviewed Eversource's comments on this PIM. I'm a little confused by the framing of the penalty, because as I understand the way this would work and maybe from too high a level that isn't founded in any kind of notion of the engineering that goes into these projects. The general notion is that selecting a non-wires solution by its nature is kind of comparing a non-wires alternative to a traditional solution. And we'd have some cost comparator then, because the traditional solution would have a cost and the alternative at the end of the day would have a cost. And as I understand this mechanism, it would be the comparison of those two costs that would go into the determination of the savings. So I think I understand Eversource's perspective that this is sort of part of a framework that the company feels is forcing them to undergo this process. And setting that aside, I mean, which OCC also doesn't agree with, but I think that's sort of outside the scope of this conversation. I don't see how this can be framed as a penalty, because it seems to be structured just where there is an identified savings that the company would be permitted to retain a portion of those savings. So I think That's my, probably 2
Yeah,
minutes.
you're just a little over. I was going to stop you there and we can, we'll discuss further. Thank you, Attorney Wheel. I'm going to come over here. I'm sorry, I couldn't see your, Mr. Sheehan. Thank you. Attorney Lon?
Thank you. Shannon Vaughn with Conservation Law Foundation. I was thinking largely along the same lines as Attorney Wheel on this and just wanted to highlight one other piece of commentary from the straw proposal. In the authority analysis, it did note that there is some potential additional value in this PIM by providing stakeholders greater access to grid data and the opportunity to participate in addressing grid needs. So I would agree with that. And just thinking about this from a stakeholder perspective, I think that there is some added value there that we can be thinking about. And just adding to what Mr. Tully was saying, I'm very excited to see the Non-Wire Solutions program getting underway. And I think everyone is committed to iterating on the process and improving it as implementation goes forward.
Thank you, Attorney Lon.
Kevin Donnelly for UI. Just briefly comment that the various dockets that are underway just need to have consistency. And I think that's the big takeaway from UI. We mentioned that in our comments as well. Whether it's in REO 7, and that's docket number 171203 REO 7, or here in REO 2, REO 3, where there is consideration of integrated distribution system planning, and then in really where the NWS process is being determined in docket 240808, it's that common thread. And that's really what's recognized in the straw, that they will defer to those dockets outside of this one. And broader comment then is just how it all weaves together. REO 1 is determining the level of revenue that the utilities would have available in a multi-year rate plan. REO 2 is the performance that the utilities would be held accountable to. And REO 3 then is how the system will perform how it'll operate and the system planning that will enable the performance. This is one aspect of that. Subject to any other outside dockets happening, that's how we really would just want to make sure we ensure consistency.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to move us into the discussion and start with some questions. Ms. McDonald, would you like to start?
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. I think a good starting point here is to provide some clarification. Based on the comments from Attorney Wheel, I can't speak on behalf of the authority, but the understanding was that what was established in docket REO 7 would be included as is in this performance portfolio. If that needs to be clarified somewhere, and that's the case, does that change the position of Eversource?
So maybe there's some misunderstanding on what REO 7 says. And that word, by the way, that word in objective is very curious. Incentivizing EDCs to transparently identify, evaluate, and select non-wire solutions resources when beneficial. Shouldn't it be when more cost-effective than a traditional solution? I am 100% in full agreement with Attorney Wheel when he mentioned that his understanding is it's just a traditional upgrade cost versus a non-wires alternative cost. That's a very legitimate cost comparison. Just compare the two. When non-wires alternative is less costly than the traditional upgrade, EDCs should have an obligation to select that non-wires alternative. But that's not how REO 7 is structured. I just want to clarify, REO 7 has stacked benefits that include societal benefits, that include capacity market benefits, that include energy market benefits. So if I now put a non-wires alternative, I have to participate in the market, right? I have to bid that into the market. I have to measure how many megawatt hours it's generating so I can measure the CO2 abatement. I have to measure those benefits. That's why REO 7 actually has an EM&V section. You cannot measure those benefits until something is in service and you can measure it over time. This is not a cost versus cost comparison. Fully in agreement with Mr. Attorney Wheel. If it was just that, I think it sounds so simple. Just compare the costs, share the savings, 25%, 75%. That is not what this is.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. I think exactly the workings of the REO7 decision and the process that's being established in 240808, we're not going to take those matters up here in the meeting today. But to Ms. McDonald's point, I think as written, the strategy, the straw proposal proposed to simply incorporate the shared savings mechanism as is, and without layering some additional incentive or penalty on top of that. So just to make that minor clarification in case that was not obvious to participants, that piece is what was intended in the straw proposal. But again, we're not going to get into the details and mechanisms within REO7 or 240808 here. So I guess with that, Ms. McDonald, did you have any further questions or
No further questions.
any questions that participants would like to ask of one another or add to the discussion here?
I'm still confused. What is the PIM here?
I think to the point that was just made, there's not an additional PIM being proposed in the straw proposal, but instead the idea is because a shared savings mechanism is another performance mechanism, does create an incentive for the company to simply incorporate that as is the shared savings mechanism, to say it is one of the sort of a field of incentive mechanisms that also advances the priority outcomes that are at stake here in the regulatory framework.
Well, I'm still confused. When you set up a PIM and you have a shared savings, what is the minimum shared savings? What is the target? What is excellent? What is poor?
Again, the straw proposal did not propose a PIM structure specifically, but instead proposed to take the shared savings mechanism as exists or as proposed in REO7 and as established through 240808 and say that is an incentive mechanism that exists and also supports the priority outcomes, and therefore it's simply considered as a part of the overall performance mechanism portfolio.
So just clarifying question again. If a non-wires alternative gets selected with REO7, the cost of a non-wires alternative is 10 million. The cost of a traditional solution is 8 million. But the benefit, societal benefit and energy market benefits are 10 million, hypothetically, right? So now all of a sudden, the non-wires alternative looks a lot cheaper than a traditional solution by a lot in that proceeding. So what is the shared savings again? Who is promising that shared savings? If it's simply by cost, I am fully in agreement with Attorney Wheel. If it's fully in cost, that cost is not ours. It's a third-party cost.
I understand.
If it's market benefits, it's not ours.
The question that you're asking here, again, I don't think we can address that in this docket as the matter at hand is not to change anything established there. I think that's better addressed through 240808 and the process there. So notwithstanding that comment, any further discussion on this topic?
Sorry, just very quickly, Gerhard Walker, also from Eversource. Just to kind of summarize, I think what Mr. Chatterjee has already said, and I think there was some confusion on our end because it does list in the straw proposal for the order, the shared savings mechanism as the first item under PIMS. So if it is not intended as a PIM, that's, I think, where our confusion came from that. The second thing is, I think what we're driving at is if it was in a future discussion to be included as a PIM or any other mechanism as in PPR, we have to really carefully consider what we actually have an influence on into us as a utility. The way it's written right now for the shared savings, to what Mr. Chatterjee has said, we're not in control of the bids that might go in. So, God forbid we put out 20 RFPs for non-wires based on the process. and half of them aren't bid on, and the other ones, the bids come in more expensive as the traditional solution. So we would end up with zero benefits, totally out of our control in this exercise. So that's kind of the point here, like we already have that process, as you mentioned yourself. That's not what we're discussing here. That process has an order behind it, which projects are eligible for non-wires, which aren't not. So thinking of it as encouraging us to participate, that my understanding was it's an order and we have to. I don't know where the encouragement here is. We already have to report the grid needs filing. We already have that full transparency. So if that's just as the point we're trying to make here, when we're considering this, we keep it to what we actually have an influence on and not what other people can bid into this process. And that it doesn't duplicate of what's already there existing.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Walker. Okay. I'm not seeing any others, or
This is
Mr.
coming down
Donnelly.
to you. I'm just trying to process it all. I'm not deeply tied to REO 7 or 240808. I'm curious though to understand if there is a thought from really, I suppose, staff on, or the OCC, how you see it, where you would see a downside to this if it wasn't selected, if it wasn't bid. If there isn't anything to evaluate, then there's nothing to select. However it gets decided. And we understand it's not going to get decided and clarified here in this docket. But maybe more directly, is this a situation where you're contemplating a PIM that is with an incentive only? In other words, if something is selected, then there's a criteria, there is a calculation that will get agreed upon somewhere else, and you have an answer. Is that what you're thinking on the OCC side?
Yes. Without trying to, I mean, I agree that I think I have a better understanding of Eversource's concerns. I agree that this isn't the place to raise them because this PIM wasn't developed in this docket. I'll also backtrack, and from our perspective, this is a performance incentive mechanism. It isn't structured like the others where there's a target and a level of performance around it, but at its most basic, it's a financial incentive mechanism that's designed to encourage the utility to take certain actions. But to answer your question, Mr. Donnelly, yes, from my understanding of how this works, in the event that a company opted not to select a non-wire solution, that this mechanism simply, nothing would happen. There would be no downside. There would be no penalty associated with this mechanism. Eversource has raised some concerns about what other things might happen to the companies if they made that choice, or even the choice not to participate in the non-wire solutions process at all. But our understanding of the shared savings mechanism here is it simply wouldn't be triggered. So there wouldn't be a penalty of any kind.
Thank you.
And just to complete that, I am 100% in agreement with Attorney Wheel on that statement. That is how this PIM should be structured. If we go through 1,000 projects a year and 50 of them are screened for non-wires and 0 of them are found to be more cost effective than a traditional utility, then this PIM should not be applicable. Thank you, Attorney Wheel.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the discussion and the commentary there, and seeing as how we have no other scorecards or metrics proposed due to the nature of the third reopener docket for PBR. We're not taking those up for discussion at this time, and it actually puts us at a decent place to, I think, stop and take our break. So, say again, Mr. Donnell.
Yes, Kevin, I do have the answer to our earlier question with Ms. McDonald. If you would like, I could share now.
Please, before
I
you take
think
the break.
the dialogue was around the timing.
Yes.
That where we have for processing on the initial pre-construction, heard back that it's 19.9 days. So pretty specific answer that I received back for how that is currently tracking. We do not have a track currently on the post-construction, given the nature of the data, the quality of it, what we're receiving back from our end and with the developer. That's something that we would need to further enhance and require some upgrade, as I understand it, to perhaps some of our software and technology, or at least minimally process. The other question was around access, what I think Attorney Long asked, and where you might be able to get some information. I do understand maybe a little different from Eversource. If a developer has a PowerClerk ID and username or username ID and password, they are able to log in and track the status. However, we also do an email trail and update for customers where and when appropriate. Thank you.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you. Okay. Let's take our break now and return at 3:15. We'll get on to the rest of our agenda at 3:15. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
No, that's not. No, I want to say.
Where?
Yeah, it's bad.
Why? I didn't, you understand. Cost versus cost thing was big, like. I mean, more confusing. So most occasionally, that's why we see it as a. I think I do understand the way it works is cost versus cost, taking into account. Benefits, right? But I do, so yes, I do feel, and that the program is to encourage the phone on a scale thing. But I think the way this works, I think that's even. But I think you still can get money. I think that's I think I actually have some of that, but oh no, yeah. I want some. I'm on vacation. Wow. It is. You're right. I do have an opinion. I understand the perspective, but I have like. Okay.
I know, maybe it should be, right? That works. Oh, really? Well, if we're gonna be, otherwise we're good. Tom has 3, I let him know that. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna try to get in green, so. Okay, I gotta go outside. So I just sent her an email. You know what? I mean, it doesn't matter, but it is awkward for people and they don't really like. I can get out, I can go get it, I just can't. Got it. All right, yeah. Here's the. I don't mind doing it, it's just that, because otherwise they're gonna. Right. I'm no longer, you don't have to deal with me after the round.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi. Oh, are you? Okay. Oh, okay. What do you do for, sir?
All right, I gotta put my animals on my list.
I used to work at, sorry, speak. Community relations. I know. Thank you for that, that was helpful. Yeah. It's good to be able to do that.
That's it, I don't want you to be able to.
Yeah, I would say. I'm running the chamber. No, it's great. Oh, cool, that's great. Yeah, certain parts. Yeah. No, we're yeah. I know.
Laura. Oh. No, I was looking if Ms. Kane had her name tag. Yeah, she was all set, Doug and, yeah. Yeah, thanks. Dan.
Yeah, no,
Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated.
Just you.
Thanks. Okay, well, welcome back from the break. I think we're going to transition into topic 3. Mr. Kramer.
Thank you, Chairman Gillette. And thank you, Ms. Lupoli, for advancing the slides. So our third topic here is to discuss the affordable service priority outcome. And within this priority outcome, the straw proposal contemplated a performance incentive mechanism, the avoided service terminations outcome, PIM, which we'll discuss in additional detail. Also 3 scorecards, affordability and energy burden scorecard, a payment arrangement scorecard, and a scorecard for accounts receivable and uncollectibles. And for reported metrics, the straw proposal proposed a variety of low income discount rate, LIDR, low income discount rate implementation metrics as that new discount rate gets rolled out, and we see the impact of that approach. So this is the overall portfolio of performance mechanisms that the STRAW proposal recommended. And on the next slide, we have a few of the characteristics discussed with respect to the Affordable Service PIM regarding avoided service termination outcomes. So here, the objective was stated as reducing the total number of residential service terminations for non-payment, and that the structure could be comprised, though I will note that the STRAW proposal called for some additional input from participants and stakeholders on this matter, that the mechanism could be comprised of 4 sub-metrics, including the number of residential service terminations, the number of residential customers designated financial hardship and or receiving medical protection after an initial termination notice, the residential customers designated hardship and or receiving medical protection after a final termination notice, and for the 4th sub-metric, residential customers designated financial hardship and or receiving medical protection. So the likely data inputs for this PIM would be the existing data, and specifically the order numbers were identified from the 2022 affordability decision. And as a preliminary matter, the STRAW proposal suggested that an incentive be symmetrical with both upside and downside opportunity and no deadband. And again, as I mentioned, the STRAW proposal recognized the need for further development of both the metrics to measure and target setting to further establish this PIM. So with that as some initial context for participants, I'd like to open it up for some initial comments on this topic. And I'll start this time. We have some new representatives at the table from Eversource. Can I ask you both to introduce yourselves and state your name and affiliation for the record, and I'll invite you to make some open comments on this PIM, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Jess Kane, Vice President of Customer Operations and Assistance Programs for Eversource across our 3 states.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Trainer. I'm the Director of Collections and Assistance Programs for Eversource.
And would the company like to start with some a couple minutes of comments? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So on the PIM for avoided service terminations, we agree with OCC and DEEP that it is a good thing to measure, but it would be better as a scorecard or metric at this time due to a number of reasons that I'll go through. But also recognizing that Connecticut has done in the last 5 years has become a leader and the model in a number of areas for providing low-income customers, for identifying low-income customers and proactively providing them the best programs and protections for them. I'm going to start with that piece of it. So the PIM had 2 stated objectives. One was to reduce shutoffs for non-payment. So as a utility, and we do say this iteratively and mean it, the last thing we want to do is shut off service for customers, but unpaid bills increase costs for all customers, full stop. For the last 4.5 years, we were not able to send any shutoff notices or perform any disconnects for our low-income or medically protected customers. That nearly tripled the uncollectibles for Connecticut customers, and they're paying for it. So the July costs that are increasing, $8 of that for the average residential customer is to pay for their peers in Connecticut who didn't pay their bills. That's something that we want to make sure is balanced, and coming out of 4.5 years of not sending any disconnect notices and not performing any disconnects, we think it's going to take some time to rebuild a new baseline, which I know was recognized by PURA in the challenges as far as determining how to figure out a baseline period. So no stakeholder proposed this as a PIM, period. So we did want to make sure we reinstate that at some point, And I know OCC did a great job of identifying other geographies that have this as a metric or a PIM. I would state if you are having a goal of reducing disconnects, that's more of a policy decision, especially for utilities with AMI. You can just pick the number. It's not a performance indicator. What would be a performance or a health indicator for customers is how many customers are eligible to shut off versus who you shut off. The less, when you're not disconnecting customers and not setting notices, uncollectibles will rise and costs for customers will rise, and it will make Connecticut further an outlier in this area. That was one of the objectives, was to reduce the shutoffs for non-payment. The second objectives, how am I doing on time, Peter?
You've got about 40 seconds on the
Got
clock.
it, okay. Is to reduce the customers designated as financial hardship after receipt of a notice or shutoff. In this area, Connecticut is now #1 in the nation. We beat Massachusetts, and I stood at that microphone 5 years ago and said we needed to have data sharing, data matching with the state, and we needed to have a discount rate. In the last year, we've implemented both of those. We've beat Massachusetts. Not only do we identify your household as financial hardship if the customer of record has a financial hardship, but if anyone else in the household has it, the state tells us automatically each month. So from a benchmarking and a baseline perspective, that went into effect last month, along with the timing of the end of the 4.5-year moratoria for financial hardship customers.
Thank you, Ms. Kane.
Thank you.
Is there does anyone want to volunteer to go next, or should we move in order? I'm not seeing hands. Got a shy group today. All right, I'm going to move around the horseshoe over to you, Mr. Rams, if you'd like to comment.
Moses Rams, Utility Workers Union. Whenever I hear this topic about affordable service, being involved in where I've been for a while now, I remember clearly protesting the generation and deregulation. What steps can we take to make generation more affordable, which would then cost of service would be reduced and we'd have less need for policy? Is there something in place that we can do about generation costs?
Oliver Tully at Acadia Center. Affordable service, affordability, energy burden are really high priorities for our organization. So we appreciate the staff's work in putting together this proposed PIM and also the comprehensiveness of all the other metrics and scorecards in this category. We support the staff proposal for this incentive. And I don't have any further comments at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Mr. Donnelly?
First, I got to get longer reach. So what are you going to do? Kevin Donnelly from UI. And I would just start with saying, echo a lot of the same comments from Ms. Kane at Eversource. I think she did an excellent job of summarizing and encapsulating a lot of where we've been and a lot of where we are. I would highlight a couple more things. When we think about an avoided service termination outcome, it is truly the last thing that the utility company wants to do is turn off somebody's service. However, it is a necessary tool sometimes that we need to have the ability to utilize so that it lessens the burden on all other customers. There is a significant burden where eventually it does get socialized in one way or another. I think the concept of being able to identify and proactively help mitigate the need to shut somebody off is a key. We're working with the Department of Social Services, getting identification of what qualifications do exist. Can we get customers to be on a financial hardship program? Can we get them to be on a payment plan ahead of time so it can avoid having the need for a termination? How quickly can they get reconnected? It's in nobody's interest to have somebody without power. The idea of the last 4.5 years has created quite a challenge with the moratorium in terms of data and having a historical data set to which we could build a benchmark to develop a target if a scorecard or even a PIM were to be put in place. but rather understanding what should be the right approach, how we deal with this. It's perhaps better thought of as saying the number of customers that are eligible as opposed to the action that is determination itself. How well are we establishing and putting people into programs ahead of time as opposed to after the fact?
Thank you.
Hey, Shannon Lund with Conservation Law Foundation. Yeah, like Mr. Tully, addressing energy burden and limiting service termination is also a priority for our organization. And just thinking about this from a customer perspective, I do wonder about opportunities to provide more resources and information for people who are at risk of having their service cut off. I'm thinking in particular from a health and safety standpoint, either with cold winter temperatures or in summer with really hot temperatures, when that can become a real safety and health issue for people if their service is terminated. And so I don't know to what extent information is provided to people who are at risk of termination, where they can go for resources, Operation Fuel, in addition to the programs that the EDCs make available. Even thinking about in the summer, if there are cooling centers that people could access. And I'm wondering if we could find a way to ensure that information is provided to customers so that they can avail themselves of opportunities if they are at risk of termination.
Garrett Sheehan, President of the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. And since we're talking about costs, I'll bring up my reasoning for being here, and I appreciate the authority inviting business associations and groups to be involved in this hearing. And what we hear from our businesses all the time is costs, and that's what some of this conversation is right now. I appreciate just sitting here, the deep thought that goes into all of these different policies. And I just bring the perspective that when these hit businesses and the costs, you may get some complaints, but the biggest response that you'll get is businesses either not investing in Connecticut or deciding to leave the state. And so my general comment overall is caution as we look at all of these policies that are being considered. But again, appreciation for the thoroughness of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. We're going to keep going around the table, and then we'll open up the discussion just a minute, Ms. Palela. Attorney Wheel.
Thanks, Tom Wheel from the Office of Consumer Counsel. I guess I'll start by saying we spent a lot of time talking to Ms. Kane and Ms. Palela from Eversource and Avangrid respectively, and their staffs trying to hammer out solutions to this really difficult problem of arrearages and disconnections and trying to help people. And I do think that I think I've said before to both companies, and I think they both agree that the actual goal is to eliminate terminations altogether, but to somehow get there as a result of eliminating the necessity for termination. So I think we're all, OCC and the companies are on the same page on that. And I would, I'd echo Ms. Kane's comments just now that data sharing, my understanding historically is that everyone sort of collectively knew that we were all missing some group of customers who did qualify for benefits, but the companies could not find them despite various efforts. And it seems that data sharing has made a big impact on that problem. I don't know whether it's safe to say that it's solved yet. But I think the point is that from our perspective, it's still early to tell because it's been implemented so recently, which feeds into, for the other various reasons addressed in our comments, why we would recommend this be a scorecard. The other reason generally is that my understanding of a scorecard is the idea is you identify an overall target, like something like a reduction in terminations, and then you measure all of the various measurable inputs that affect that target. And you try to isolate what it is that the companies are doing, aren't doing that move the needle towards that end result. And I think particularly with the data that we have coming out of COVID being sort of historically anomalous, the implementation being so recent of data sharing, it makes a lot of sense to us to structure this as a scorecard to kind of get a sense of what's going on before we can figure out what should need to be what should change. The last thing I'll say, and I know you're going to cut me off in a second, Mr. Creamer, is the way we read this decision, the straw proposal is that it doesn't implement a performance mechanism around the number of terminations, but rather, as both companies have recommended, implements a mechanism that is based on reducing or increasing the number of customers who have access to benefits and therefore are in less of a situation where terminations are necessary. So I'm sure I'm at 2 minutes now. Thank you.
I'll have to dock it from your next allowance of time, Attorney Wheel. But thank you everyone for those comments to get us started. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Kozlowski, please.
Not a problem. Ginny Kozlowski, South Central Connecticut Regional Economic Development Corporation. In our region, we have 5,000 residential units in construction or approved, which will benefit both Eversource and UI as customers. But one of the roles that we play is attracting new talent into the region. And when they do that cost benefit analysis, and the cost of utilities is a factor, whether it's residential or commercial, we are at a disadvantage. We also track the number of poverty cases within our 15-town region from Milford to Madison to Meriden, and we are seeing those poverty numbers increase. And it's not always in our urban centers, and the number of households have increased in our region. So concern about how these costs get allocated and how they are predicted going forward, because predictability is a critical element to the businesses that will stay here. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, we're gonna get into our facilitated discussion with which Ms. McDonald's going to start in just a moment, but Ms. Palella, I see you approach the podium, please.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments in reference to what everyone said. Lots of agreement with the points that have already been made. I did want to mention there's a comment on making sure customers are aware of the programs that we offer, and I think that is a highlight that we want to emphasize as utilities, that we do a lot in reference to communicating what we have. I think we're doing a better job, as mentioned, working with the Department of Social Services, but in addition, using emails, text messages, letters, whatever it is, we believe that will get the customer's attention to get them in a program that can help them, that can match their payments prior to getting to that disconnection stage. So in full support of either a metric or a scorecard. And as Mr. Wheel said, a lot of unknowns right now between the pandemic and all the policy changes that are impacting all of the components of this particular, how this leads up to a termination and how we enroll customers in programs. So I think it's a prime candidate for some taking a step back and looking at the metrics and understanding what kind of target could be established down the road for this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else from the audience want to be heard on this topic before we get into some discussion questions? Okay. All right. Ms. McDonald?
Well, thank you, Mr. Kramer. On good segue from Ms. Palella's comments, I was wondering how can the EDCs, or what else can the EDCs do to increase their influence on timely, understandable notices to educate and empower customers to participate in and successfully complete assistance programs, which would give you the outcome here that we're trying to get to of avoiding service termination.
Thank you, Ms. McDonald. And I think Lon had a similar question as well, which was about how we communicate with our customers so that they can engage them to take advantage of our programs and protections, which we have completely overhauled in the last 5 years. Our customer communications, every word has been reviewed by customers, VOC, voice of the customer tested, all stakeholders. Much of it has been written by stakeholders, and every piece of it has been Pura approved in the last 5 years, including there's about a 5-page single-space script that all of our CSRs need to speak to customers about whenever they call us. So at this point, now that we're beyond the 4.5-year moratorium, notices are the best way to do that. The disconnect notices, 91% of customers who have not taken action to resolve their past due balance will upon receipt of a disconnect notice. They work. We don't want to create a disincentive for our notices to be effective, which is what this PIM would do. This PIM it would penalize the utility when a customer responds to our notices like we're asking them to do, like all stakeholders have weighed in on to have us do for the last 5 years. It would penalize us for identifying them as a result of our notices. Everything else we've done, and that's why we're #1 in the nation for doing that. Last piece is on this PIM, it's not symmetrical. We are #1 in the nation. We have more customers identified as financial hardship than even the state does by 50,000 customers at this point. So we're best, full stop. That means this is a downside only PIM. It doesn't make sense. We love to try to be best in this area. Let us unleash us to continue to try and find ways to do that. When we find them, we're going to harvest them. But at this point, we've done fantastic in this area. As a state, Avangrid as well with DSS.
Thank you, Ms. Kane.
Welcome.
Any comments from Avangrid?
Yeah, I would just again echo Ms. Kane's sentiments. We work very closely together, Eversource and UI. We've got our customer communications team work together, our collections teams work together. And as Ms. Kane said, a lot of the communications, we get feedback from all of the stakeholders. So I think the job that we've done up till now is exceptional, and we're going to continue to look for creative ways in order to continue to improve that. But to have a PIM like this to send a message to the utilities is that this is a negative to get customers' attention by using the notices or using a disconnection. It is only going to, cause perhaps some unintended consequences and increase costs to the rest of the customers who are paying for these programs.
Thank you, Ms. Bella.
Ms. McDonald, can I clarify one additional piece?
Yes.
Just there was a misinterpretation in the Pura Straw proposal that I think caused some confusion with stakeholders. That figure 1 on page 81, it interpreted the shutoff for non-pay outcomes. It interpreted that to mean that when a customer is designated as hardship, that they're verified hardship. They are not in this data. This is a customer saying, I have a financial hardship because we pre-screen them. The vast majority ultimately don't. They don't verify that they have a financial hardship. They submit their documents and don't, or just never follow up. So there is no baseline. There's no record. We don't know this data. No stakeholder knows this data. We've never looked at it before. So I wanted to clarify that because that's a significant misinterpretation of the reported data.
Thank you, Ms. Kane. And I heard your comments about sending the notices as it incentivizes customers to respond. And I'm not asking you to quote any statistics for me here off the bat. But I'm curious, how does that translate to the number of actual terminations that happens within the companies? This question is also for Avangrid. And how can we reduce those numbers? I think that's what the PIM is trying to get at, and specifically outside of the moratorium. Because if the customer, whether it's verified or unverified, once the designation of hardship, you're not getting terminated. But outside of the moratorium, what happens to those who are not verified and get past the termination notice where their services are actually terminated?
Good question, Ms. McDonald. So I would have to look back to 2019 or earlier for when we had last had a period of time where we were disconnecting financial hardship for medical customers. But it was still 5 to 7% of total customers that on an annual basis that Eversource would be disconnecting for non-payment. That's about 1/3 of most utilities in the nation that have AMI. When you have smart metering, it is much easier to disconnect and reconnect. So we are among the lower in the nation from a percentage perspective. And that is identified as one of the quantified, I think there were some questions about that, one of the quantified pieces of the business case for AMI as it was for nearly every utility in the nation. For what we can do, we want to reduce, we would love that there are customers who can't pay and plus customers who won't pay. These 91% who paid upon receipt of a notice, they could pay, they did pay. For those who can't pay, those are the ones we're trying to reach with the new low-income discount rate, with extending their financial hardship to a full year like we've been with the DSS data matching. And PURA has just asked us to give an additional proposal now that we've got a little more data from the state data sharing on how else should we modify the new low-income discount rate. And we've recommended in there proposed a discount up to 75% for those who need it most. Ideally, you can prevent the financial hardship from the onset, even for those who are on SSI, those who have the deepest, the lowest income. However, there are still some customers who can pay, who don't pay, period.
Thank you, Ms. Kane.
Again, the challenge of the timing of this PIM is that it's immediately after this 4 years of not taking action. So in order to gather data and understand what the historical data is as far as customers responding to notices, we have to start tracking that going forward versus looking at the past 4 years, because we've sort of trained customers that they don't need to necessarily react in order to avoid a disconnection. So that's a challenge. And I think just in general, we have seen, I don't have any data right off at my fingertips here, but we do have data to show that when a customer gets a notice, they do respond and they do avoid a disconnection of service in many times. And I also echo Ms. Kane's comment in reference to the way we're tracking this, because that's definitely for Avangrid as well. If a customer gets disconnected and they call, and they can claim hardship, which will code them that. And if that's the way we're pulling this data, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean they are financial hardship, because then we wait for the confirmation. And many times we don't get the confirmation, or the confirmation doesn't support that they qualify for financial hardship. So we really have to take a hard look at all of the components of this before it can be created as a PIM.
Thank you, Ms. Palala.
Ms. McDonald, I'd like to ask a follow-up question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Ms. Palala, you mentioned and Ms. Kane, you mentioned this as well, the past 4 years and the moratorium have presented a challenge in terms of looking at a baseline or looking to a benchmark. I'm curious what your thoughts would be on going back further in that case. If the last 4 years are inappropriate, what about the most recent 3 or 5 years, if we look back just past the moratorium? Would that be an appropriate way to look at more business as usual? Or is it that the policies have evolved so much that we're in a different position? Could you please comment on that?
2019 back? Yeah, I mean, number one, I know that Avangrid would not have the data for some of these components of this PIM, understanding immediately after a notice who qualified for hardship, immediately after a disconnection. We didn't gather that type of data, because as you know, it almost was like a different world in collections at that point. So I think we would not have the data to be able to gather that historical information.
Mr. Kramer, to your question, yes, policies have significantly changed. I'll refer to the key collections practice changes table on Eversource's page 50. We did make recommendations about a week ago in our energy affordability and arrears management plan to make modifications so that the utilities can begin collecting again. But payment plans have nearly doubled in duration for no payment before they break, and you can break them twice as often within a calendar year without paying. You can the payments required to get reconnected are 5% or $25, or where it used to be 30% to 100%, depending on customers' past due balance. Customers are not paying nearly what they needed to do, what they need to pay before. And similarly for the payments required to reconnect, the lower of 50% or $1,000, including for businesses, many of them have significant past due balances. It's it's having a contributing lasting effect on uncollectibles. Utilities are no longer allowed to collect residential deposits for any customers, and legal collections have been stood down for a year. So we are nowhere normal, and we're very much an outlier compared to the rest of the industry.
Thank you for that, to help get in the record that some of those additional pieces, or reiterate them in this case maybe. One other clarifying question I wanted to ask is, I think I heard Ms. Kane, I think it was you, refer to the this PIM as being a penalty only. Is it the case that the company sees that there's no opportunity for incentive, or is that a misunderstanding of how it was written as both upside and downside?
Because we're best in the nation, full stop. And we're 50,000 higher than the state of Connecticut. So how to go up from here compared to the other 50 states in the nation, what does that, there are no more tricks left. There's no more options as far as identifying more customers than we already have.
Okay, so it sounds like the point you're making is that it's to say that though it was written as upside and downside, you don't see opportunity for additional improvement. So the company is operating completely optimally in terms of how it's serving
We're
customers
optimating
for affordability?
best in the nation, and we are the model for the nation. All other utilities in other states want to know what we're doing.
Okay, I guess, but I also heard you say that we can't compare to other states because we are leading in some of these ways.
We do compare, we're best.
I guess, but my question is instead asking if you're suggesting that we can't look to other states to benchmark for how we would do this, how we would establish a PIM like this, then, and we can't look at the company's prior performance. I guess what I'm looking for is two things. First, that the straw proposal stated symmetrical, but the company interprets that it is not because there's no opportunity to improve. And then the second question I have is, what affirmative proposals might anyone at the table, not just Eversource or UI, have for finding modifications or different structure options to ensure that we are supporting the affordable service outcome?
We are absolutely committed to the affordable service outcome, full stop for sure. I think all stakeholders are saying this time, we lost the baseline. So giving it some time, given the moratorium just lifted a few weeks ago, that's, I think, what we're proposing. And then in the future, other states can have it as a PIM, but I would offer, if you're saying just disconnect fewer customers, that's just a decision to make. It's not a performance metric. But I think what's important, Mr. Kramer, is the way the measurement is listed, we would be penalized. I mean, one way that I could game this to win it, if structured this way, by making our notices less effective to get fewer customers to take advantage, like to contact us after I've sent them a disconnect notice, to do less, to qualify fewer of them for financial hardship. That's a disincentive. That's bad. You don't want that. But that's the way the metric is defined, the second outcome. So that part is flawed, period, and should not be a part of this. But I know where it was going, which is to proactively identify as many low-income customers as possible. For that piece of it, I think we've done it. For lowering the total number of disconnects, we're just coming out of COVID. So we are not, we're not at levels that are even healthy yet for a utility to be performing for managing uncollectibles. But in the years ahead, I think, most PBR proceedings like we've had in Massachusetts for quite a long time, every 5 years or so, you'll revisit and say, okay, how do we want to check and adjust now? I think at some point that it could graduate, but I think at this point, having it as a scorecard would be most productive, or a metric.
I hear you on that point. And I think, again, the second part of my question is, what are some affirmative proposals that you or others at the table might have to support this outcome? Because I think as everyone in this room knows, Connecticut customers pay among the highest utility rates in the country. And so I would say that, I think the straw proposal is written in such a way that establishes that there is something to do here on this outcome. And so when we hear there's no room for improvement with the PIM, then I think we need to look at alternatives to say, what can we do to modify to ensure that we are making some progress on this this real issue of affordability in our state.
Yes, and
So-
let me clarify that there are multiple pieces of the PIM. The PIM that we are best in, the PIM aspect, is us proactively identifying the financial hardship customers. That piece is where Full Stop's done best. On how can we help customers achieve affordable service, that's way broader than these two outcomes. And it includes do more collections to bring down the costs for all customers in Connecticut. We are way an outlier, more than 2 years later than any other state in the nation for lifting our COVID moratorium. That increased costs for all the businesses in Connecticut who are asking, why is my bill going up in July? We have to perform prudent collections, and we're not doing it right now. We need to be able to, but the policies need to change so that we can do it. So on that piece, there's more to come, more to do on. Ultimately, it's identifying customers who would be eligible to disconnect versus actual disconnects. But that would need to be driven over time with additional policy decisions. And most of the bill is not from the distribution side, as we all know very clearly from the front page of the beautiful bill image that we and customers really appreciate right now.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on other potential modifications to this PIM to sort of help advance the progress on the affordable service outcome overall? Attorney Juan?
I think you were
Oh,
ahead of
yes.
me.
You feel free, because I have a more general comment, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a comment or perhaps a question. In the straw proposal, there's a reference to a utility in Illinois that works with community-based organizations to help connect eligible customers with financial assistance. And so I know both utilities made reference to working with stakeholders, and I'm wondering in particular if you already work with municipalities and with community-based organizations to help reach customers.
At Avangrid, we do exactly that. We work, the customer service group works directly with our government relations, community relations group, and we partner throughout the year. We've done a number of partnerships with events, in-person events for customers, not only about energy affordability, but energy efficiency as well. So that's an ongoing initiative for us, which is something that we have improved over time. And touching on what can we as utilities do, that's one thing that we have definitely stepped up our efforts over the past couple of years in that area.
Hi, Dan Trainer from Eversource. Similar to what Ms. Palella said, we work with community action agencies. We work with towns to train them on the different programs and protections that we offer. Year to date, we've done over 50 events, whether it's joining Avangrid with an event, hosting our own event, joining Center for Children's Advocacy for events, or hosting our own webinars. Or just this past weekend, we were at an event that a town held, and we were, there supporting customers and informing them on any of the programs and protections we have. So we're out in the community, spreading the word on what we have to offer.
Thank you, Mr. Go ahead.
But Ms. Lon, I think on the scorecard item for energy burden, what we were proposing is a working group so that we could bring in some new stakeholders into the process on like, here's what we do today, here's what that could look like. And I don't know, Mr. Kramer, if we're at scorecards yet or not, but we did have some comments on the scorecards.
Yeah, if we can we'll round out a few more, see if Ms. McDonald, if you had other questions, and I know Attorney Wheel wanted to comment, and then we can open back to the scorecards and metrics. Attorney Wheel.
Thank you. I was going to offer another unhelpful response to your question, Mr. Kramer, but
maybe we'll go back to Ms. McDonald.
I just wanted to point out that I think from our perspective, we don't disagree that the data as we see it inarguably shows that, as I think Ms. Kane said, disconnection notices do work if you want to frame it that way, meaning that there is a massive uptick in the number of customers who are able to pay their bill after receiving a disconnection notice. But the problem with that from our perspective is that a better there should be a better tool. That a disconnection notice seems like sort of a blunt force instrument to produce that result. And we see the intent of the straw proposals PIM here as trying to resolve that, as trying to formulate a framework so that the disconnection notice doesn't need to be the thing that ultimately reduces the number of disconnections. The unhelpful part of my response is I don't know what that thing should be. And we've thought a lot about it. I think the utilities have also thought about it, but I just wanted to reinforce that as we read the PIM here, it seems that the authority is also thinking about it, and it seems that there seems to be some consensus that that's maybe the problem we're trying to solve, is trying to find some other incentivizing tool for customers to replace the experience of receiving a disconnection notice being the mechanism that makes you ultimately resolve your arrearage. That was my only comment.
Thank you, Attorney Will, but that's a good segue to the question I have for the EDCs. Because in listening to all the comments, right, it's the action that needs to be taken by the EDCs before we can get to the termination notices. And I'm wondering, how does the review officer process plays into this? None of that was mentioned by the EDCs. Perhaps if the review officer process is, I don't know, evaluated or examined in a different light, where if customers are having difficulty paying the bill and they go to this person and find a payment plan that's more affordable, we don't even have to think about termination notices.
So thank you for that question. On review officer, and we did propose, we clarified how the review officer statutes and regulatory directives work in the plan that we submitted a week ago, including second and third chances on payment plans. Ultimately, customers need to pay. And that's what they haven't been doing. We're required to offer them the lowest amount possible in every interaction right out of the gates. We will get penalized if we don't. And we've worked hard so that we do that in every live interaction. But we have customers who are just not paying at all, ever, because they don't need to. They're daisy chaining the payment plans, just like for the last 4.5 years, many did not pay at all. So ultimately, this is not in the utilities' control. Customers need to pay something versus nothing. The authority in 2022 defined what the payment plan parameters were. We did propose modifications jointly with UI in the plan a week ago, but we've got the best arrears forgiveness programs in the nation. I hate to double down on the best, but you pay 1/12 your past due you pay just your average bill amount, and we forgive 1/12 your past due balance. With the new MPP amount, with the new MPP program, you just pay your average bill and your past due balance is matched for forgiveness. It's not an issue of getting them on the programs. The PURA has approved probably 6-7 times in the last 5 years our motions to automatically enroll customers in the payment plans that are best for them. They still need to pay. And if they're not paying, their past due balance grows and grows and grows. So keeping the lights on for them has actually been easier than now. They have a huge past due balance built up over 4.5 years, which is a bad collections practice. The higher that bill and the longer you wait to pay it, the harder it is to pay. So we send missed payment notices, late payment notices. We send it via email, text, and phone if you want it. We have to all customers, providing them a shut-off notice, what you can do, programs to help in beautiful graphics. We do take advantage of every opportunity to help customers. However, ultimately, they need to pay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any circumstance where it was because the customer couldn't afford the payment arrangement that we were offering them because of the minimum that they are required to pay, which is that $25 down or 5%, whichever is lower. So we're always offering the lowest option. So I'm not aware of that's the reason why the customer then is goes through the shut off process because they didn't get an affordable enough payment arrangement.
All right, thank you, Ms. Palella.
And if I could offer just a broader comments, Kevin Donnelly here with UI as well. As listening to the conversations, excellent, I think informative insights. I'd like perhaps just share a comment here. I think of the process as really like a three-legged stool that has to work together. You need to be able to maintain or improve operational performance. You got to be able to keep rates as affordable as we can. And then you also need to be able to maintain or improve the financial health of the company. In this particular case, we're under a lot of strain. Our arrearage balance over the last four or plus years has grown by about 33%. And it reflects itself in ultimately when customers who can pay don't pay, and an increased charge to the rest of our customers through the socialization of it. Most importantly, though, those who can't pay need to be able to find their way to every program possible in order to get the help and the service that they need. How can we collaboratively come up with that, either through what the EDCs are going to do, through what other community programs can offer, through what others around the table here can contribute to, is really, I think, the goal. Everybody would acknowledge we want the customer who needs help to get as much help as possible. We want the companies who are owed the cash to receive as much as they are owed, so that the businesses and the rest of our customers don't end up paying an undue share. I think that's just my overarching comment.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we do want to take a moment to look back. Ms. Lupoli, if you could go take this one back in the slides for the portfolio, in case participants also have some comments to offer on the scorecards and reported metrics that were contemplated in the straw proposal as well. I'll just pause to see if anyone would like to add to the discussion on these topics. Mr. Rams, please.
Moses Rams, Utility Workers Union. One thing that I just don't want to get lost in the conversation is the impact that it's had on our customer care reps throughout this process. Over the last 4 years, it's been a dramatic change in the work that they have to do. And our concern is how that can potentially impact their performance. It's a difficult task, the one which I couldn't do. We'll talk to many of our customers daily who are in tears discussing their bills. And our reps are well-trained in how to handle each one of those calls, but after some time, it does take a negative impact on them. That's a piece that I think that should be considered, how our reps are dealing with call after call after call about hardships. And it may potentially impact their performance.
Thank you, Mr. Rams.
Mr. Kramer,
Please.
can you unpack that a little bit for me, please? How is it impacting their performance, taking the calls?
Well, I guess I can compare it to someone who works in the ER. Maybe they get desensitized to seeing bloody guts every day come in, or gunshot wounds. Our customer reps don't adjust to it that well. Having to deal with one after the other, someone who's in hardship who may actually be your neighbor. It's a difficult emotional process as well, and that can impact their performance. It's just something to be considered. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but it's potential exists.
Thank you, Mr.
Ms. Kane?
So on the scorecards, we thought all three were good. The energy affordability and burden scorecard, we welcomed. We would like that to have a working group proposed. We think that that one is being navigated differently in different states, but I think it'll also build the relationships to understand what's most important in this field. And a few things to clarify: household size matters. If we pick 2 people in the household versus 4, it makes a huge difference, all the difference, as far as like who's actually eligible for as low income. Electrification matters in this same scorecard. We don't want to disincent electrification when we're trying to incent electrification. So for all of the delivered fuel companies, for example, who aren't in the energy burden overall analysis, that needs to be considered. And then we also had recommended that we include the cost to all customers to provide the benefits versus just the benefits to customers. And that's also in support of what CIEC and others have said. The payment arrangement scorecard, we welcome that one. We do think that it is a direct indicator of the payment plan parameters that we've been ordered to follow 2 years ago, and we did propose some changes in the annual plan that was submitted a week ago. Same thing with the arrears and uncollectible scorecard. We welcome that. We also think it is a measurement of the Connecticut policies right now, and in particular that when we're always required to ask customers to pay the least amount possible, that's what they're doing. They're paying the least amount possible, and that is bad for all customers. But we do support all 3 scorecards as a way to see how Connecticut is doing in those areas.
Thank you. Anything further on scorecards or metrics with respect to the affordable service priority outcome?
I would echo Kevin Donnelly here, just what Ms. Kane said about the working group. I think that's very helpful. And that we got to get some definition around what the energy burden is. What's the calculation, what gets included, everybody agree, get full definition around it, that it can be tracked, that it can be reported, and that then you have a target that's appropriate based on the benchmarking of historical data.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we are on track on our agenda to move ahead. So what I'd like to do is ask you, Ms. Lupoli, to advance, yeah, perfect, to reliable and resilient electric service. Great. Okay. For this priority outcome, the straw proposal proposed what we referred to as an equitable reliability PIM, looking at performance of the companies with respect to the CME and CLID metrics, customers experiencing multiple interruptions, and CLID customers experiencing long interruption durations. And we also proposed scorecards, Blue Sky, SAIDI, SAIFI, and CAIDI, and All in SAIDI, and a number of reported metrics, including major storm reports, 5-year outage history by cause, circuit level performance information, voltage irregularities and power surges, and power quality metrics. So we'll move to the next slide, please, Ms. Lupoli, to look at some of the high-level characteristics of the equitable reliability PIM. And the objective here was to drive EDC performance to provide reliable service through customer-centric measures. So looking at equitability, I think maybe through a broader interpretation of the term equitable, in terms of we often use it to discuss distressed municipalities and environmental justice communities, but this PIM is looking at equitable service and the provision of service for customers who are receiving relatively less reliable service than others. The mechanism of structure was proposed to include 2 submetrics, as I mentioned, CME and CLID, and the likely data inputs were presumed to be existing reliability data used to calculate CME and CLID. And for target setting and/or incentive setting considerations, the straw proposal acknowledged that we needed some further discovery to set the targets and incentive structure, and that I think in the straw proposal, again, presumed that we could look to historical data to start to uncover and understand some of the past CME and CLID trends. And the incentive structure as proposed in the straw proposal was downside only, with more details that we would need to develop through additional discovery and an opportunity like today's discussion. So with those opening comments on the recap of the straw proposal, I'll start. I haven't yet started on this side with you, Mr. Sheehan, but I'll start over here and work my way around the horseshoe.
Garrett Sheehan, Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. I have actually worked for both utilities prior to working for the business community and worked with businesses when they have reliability issues during storms. The only comment I'll just make is that location, that's part of the factors that go into businesses. If they're going to be in downtown New Haven, they know there's a tremendous reliability because of the grid system. Other locations, there can be other issues that come with it that are factors outside of the control of the utility. And so I'm speaking from the business perspective, but having seen on both sides, I do think reliability is something, it's definitely a data point that our businesses use, especially larger businesses, when they're trying to identify those locations.
Hey, Shannon Lund with Conservation Law Foundation. Just one comment, in thinking about the benchmarking process, I do wonder whether there's an opportunity for a more forward-looking process. Just thinking about what's forecasted in terms of climate impacts with heavier precipitation, more frequent and severe storms, and the result that that can have on outages. I wonder if there is a way of incorporating that forecasted data when we're thinking about reliability and what can be done proactively.
Kevin Donnelly with UI. So overall, our probably biggest challenge with this particular proposal on the PIM is just what happens to the capital prioritization. And we hear in RE01 about the setting of capital funding and the base level. We've got a core obligation, safe and reliable service. That is number one, that we will always provide at a system level. And then to have a PIM that is at a customer level that may, for very good reason, end up with circuits that don't perform quite as well, be it due to lack of tree trimming consents that we are getting in particular areas and neighborhoods such as Fairfield, which is one of our more affluent neighborhoods and communities, or motor vehicle hits that take 5, 9, 12 plus hours, depending on the nature of it, to go out and respond to just a handful of customers. If you have a PIM that is specifically designed with a downside only for customer level reliability, it forces a prioritization discussion that we don't think is really in the best interest of the overall system itself. And that's an area that we want to be able to explore further. There's limited capital. You've heard on Friday and prior to that in the RE01 discussion about the need that we've had for some austerity measures. And it would be challenging if we were to be in a position that we had to be forced to either choose to redirect capital funds, the very few that we do have, towards a customer level reliability issue, or incur even additional financial challenges from an ROE perspective and the financial health of the company taking a significant hit. So we want to find a way to address system level reliability as our core, and then perhaps track what we can do at a customer level with the right amount of data. I'll stop there, share some other comments as we go around.
Thank you. Mr. Tully.
Oliver Tully with Acadia Center. One thing that we would be interested in talking about as a group and to get input from others is the extent to which we could collect really granular data to help inform this PIM as well as the other scorecards and metrics within this category, specifically around potential disparities across demographic factors related to the time it takes to restore power. For example, are there disparities across income groups or areas designated as environmental justice communities related to power restoration? And I'd appreciate any thoughts about the ability to bring that kind of data into this PIM.
Moses Rams, Utility Workers Union. I'd like to add to what Attorney Long had said. I think that it would be an excellent approach to be proactive. I don't know, Friday when we left here, we had a quick little microburst through our state, and it lasted maybe 15 minutes, and it caused an enormous amount of outages just because of the heavier rainfall that we're seeing every time any one of these storms go through. And I know that we've taken steps to have multiple crews in each one of our towns on a daily basis. So our line workers are spread throughout our entire territory. They're not focused on just one area versus the other. And being a kid that grew up in Bridgewater, I wouldn't allow that for our communities to be neglected anyway because of who lives there or what their income is.
Okay, so I have four distinct issues with this one. So I'll just start with the first one is similar to the non-wires. We have a PIM now based on something that is a metric that utilities have never really focused their investments in. So we have no operational history to understand what level of investment is needed to derive what level of performance. Again, flouting one of the basic fundamental design principles of PBR. The second, there is this misconception that this is equitable and affordable. And today I've actually brought printouts because details actually matter. Happy to walk through how unaffordable CME and CLID metrics are. And that's fine if that is the direction of the authority. But that brings me to my third point. We have argued time and again that we need incremental investment for incremental performance. There is nothing in this PIM that directs that incremental investment for the utilities to be able to recover that, or in REO1. I listened to it yesterday on Friday's discussion. I heard nothing about providing the utilities additional capital on top of their base capital. I actually heard the opposite, where the utility rates would be lower than their base costs based on a historic test year. So that's kind of an ongoing problem with all of this proceeding. And then REO1 and REO2, right? When we talk about REO1, we're talking about rates being lower than utilities costs. And in REO2, you just heard from Jess Kane, that's likely a downward PIM. This is a downward PIM. NWS, we had that discussion before. At best, it's a nothing PIM if no non-wires are found. And then on the DERs, based on operational performance, if you set the target upside or downside with a wide band, likely you're within the band. So you basically have a double whammy for utilities where you have cash strapped on REO1 and 2 out of the 4 penalty-only PIMs, which drives us to a very unsustainable place, as we can all imagine. So happy to walk through the details as we go through this discussion on why this is very serious for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. Ms. Kozlowski.
Hi, Jenny Kozlowski, South Central Connecticut Regional Economic Development Corporation. This is important to us in terms of keeping our businesses here who look to expand and looking to attract. Reliability is critical in their decision-making, and the ability to expand and not have to move because the service is available in Connecticut and in the region. Our other issue around reliability is that we have many businesses that are in the healthcare field that impact patient care. So we need to know that those businesses are supported and have reliable service. Thank you.
Attorney Wheel.
Yeah, Tom Wheel for the Office of Consumer Counsel. We filed some comments specifically about this PIM. One of our comments was that we weren't sure about the downside only nature of it. I just wanted to clarify that our concern there just has to do with sort of the structure of the incentive, meaning if the CME and CLID metrics are, if what we're trying to do is incentivize the company not to drop below a standard CME and CLID metric, then maybe a negative downside only PIM would make sense. If what we're trying to do is incentivize them to exceed a standard, then maybe a symmetrical or upside PIM would make more sense. We're not clear which is the case, and I think the straw proposal references and sort of the slides, the necessity for more kind of historical data to kind of see where we're at. So I guess I just wanted to clarify that's sort of what we were saying there as the structure of the PIM. I will say on a broad level, as consumer advocates, it makes sense to us that if there are customers out there who are receiving service that's of lower quality than other customers, these customers are paying the same rates as everybody else. Those rates are designed based on the cost they're imposing on the system. And if they are getting a lower commensurate benefit for those costs, it does make sense for us collectively to be concerned about that and come up with solutions to mitigate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, for the our discussion part, I'd like to start off with a question practically, because I think as the straw proposal suggested, there's some details to work out here and to better understand. And so my first question for the EDCs is about the extent to which existing reliability data, historical reliability data, can be used to sort of backcast and to look back and say, based on historical performance of the grid and of our various circuits, can we go back and recreate CME and CLID for past years prior to when those metrics were established as priorities through other authority dockets. So that's what I'd like to just open up with, to understand, looking back in historical use of data to start to better understand CME CLID.
I'll start, Elian Taco with Eversource. So going back, recalculating CME CLID at the town circuit level for many years back, we are able to do that. We have the data and it's available to us. Is that data usable? That's a very difficult question to answer. The target of our reliability programs has historically been SAIDI. Does SAIDI programs impact CME? Yes, they do. Very much so. But we don't actually have a way to quantify that relationship. If we spend X dollars for SAIDI, that's our primary goal. As a byproduct, we reduce CME as well. What's that relationship? So the availability and the usability of the data are two very different items when we talk about going back and benchmarking.
Ms. Nataku, is the Dr. Nataku, is the limitation then, if I'm hearing you right, is more on not necessarily recreating the reliability calculation of CME and CLID, but maybe, if I heard you right, tying capital invested to performance or to those historical metrics. Is that accurate?
Correct. The effectiveness of each program to CME. That's what we don't know.
I see. And is there anything in the straw proposal that leads the company to believe that the dollar invested that the straw proposal is proposing to tie dollars invested to performance?
So I mean, the fact of the matter is we have details to figure out, right? We have a PIM now. Let's say the target is reduce CME 9 customers by X% arbitrarily. We don't have any understanding of how much money that would take, right? Because the company has been improving SAIDI and SAIFI for decades. So if you have 15 customers at the end of a rich town, by the way, the top 10 towns, depending on any given year, where you have highest CME customers count are Greenwich, Stamford, Ridgefield, and if we all know Connecticut, these are not towns that they have average income of $150,000 plus. If you look at the towns that are distressed communities, their incomes are 2 times those top 10 towns, purely looking at distressed communities, right? So CME and CLID metrics are excellent in distressed communities relative to wealthy communities. So there's kind of a misnomer, but if that's the direction the authority wants for us to go target CME 9 and CLID 9 reductions in those very affluent neighborhoods, we still don't know how much dollar we would need for how much reduction in CME 9 and CLID 9. So here we are with a PIM based on a target, based on no operational history, based on no actual investments directed to reducing CME 9 and CLID 9. You can understand why we're in this predicament.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Would anyone else like to comment on the questions?
Eddie Mulholland, Senior Director for the Digital Networks team in UI. So to answer the question, firstly, around the data, we would be able to reproduce that data for prior years. I would say that one note of caution would be that we've advanced our data analytics and scrubbing process. So more recent years, the data is generally more robust at that level of granularity. I think we would echo the comments made from Eversource around some of our broader concerns around the investments required to improve our CME and CLID metrics. I think our concerns are firstly the volatility that we see. So whether that be very localized issues that can trigger customers to breach CME and CLID threshold because of relatively, I'll say, unique environmental external factors. Kevin mentioned motor vehicle accidents. Very difficult to prevent these proactively. And in terms of avoiding the long duration outage, also very difficult. We've got to manage that repair in a safe manner, and that puts constraints on how quickly that can be carried out. When we then get into other means of investments and maintenance that drive our system reliability, I think if you look overall at our current performance of SAIFI and CAIDI and SAIDI, our system reliability metrics, we are extremely strong in those areas, and that's reflected in the reliability that our customers receive. And if we were to suddenly redirect our focus to chase CME and CLID improvement, there are likely to be consequences on those broader system metrics, which, as I said, we haven't modeled that, but the consequences are likely that we would see deterioration in those areas over time.
Yeah, and Kevin Donnelly, if I could add a little bit as well to my colleague here, thinking about it as unintended consequences. So perhaps we just need to understand the data a bit better and the objective for what we're trying to accomplish. You heard Mr. Diganto Chatterjee over here say that in their case, some of their more affluent neighborhoods is where they have challenges. Same here in UI's case. The disadvantaged communities at a circuit level, I understand it, I've enjoyed some of the stronger performance relative to system. 24% of the circuits in DAX are above our system average in terms of reliability, so stronger performance. And to Attorney Wheel, your comment around very appropriately, if a customer is paying for any service, they should get value out of that for what it is. By the nature of a average, that means somebody is going to do a little better, somebody's going to do a little worse. What we want to avoid are huge disparities and significant swings where you see one particular circuit or neighborhood or class of customers getting such high exceptional level of service to the detriment of another section of our system or class. It's not the way UI ultimately approaches its planning. We do it at a system level, but by its nature, it's going to address the overall approach for the system and what's in best interest of that, deploying the capital necessary so that we can enjoy and continue to provide some of the best system level reliability for the last 2 decades in the Northeast and across the country. That's what we are wanting to make sure we don't have an unintended consequence of impacting by chasing perhaps CME and CLID, which is not ultimately getting at the real desired impact, which is ensuring equitable service to all of our customers.
Mr. Tully, please.
Oliver Tully, Acadia Center. I just wanted to clarify my earlier comment about kind of collecting data across these categories. Certainly wasn't to assume any particular outcome, but more just to say that, and following on for the last few comments, that the kinds of data that Mr. Chatterjee provided is extremely helpful. And I was more just pointing out that it would be really useful to use that kind of data to inform the ultimate PIM that's developed and lead us to a point where we might say, CME and CLIT are our priorities, but depending on how we're defining equity, for example, we might refine the exact actions that are taken as a result of these broader factors and demographic data that's collected.
To answer to that, sometimes added granularity doesn't really serve that purpose. So if we look at the town level, we see fluctuations on the number of CMEs, the top ranking CME towns, just because of how weather patterns are, how minor storms behave. That would happen whether we look at a circuit level or a town level. So we do notice this large fluctuation in our data. The top circuit for CME in 2023 is not the same in 2022. It's something else, somewhere very different in our territory.
As a quick clarification question. All of our restoration plans are filed with Pura and they're approved. Is there a potential for the CME and CLE to be in conflict with the restoration process that's already filed with the authority?
I would pose that question back to the companies.
So critical customers aside, we restore based on customers impacted. So probably yes, right? That CLEAT is impacted by restoration times.
Would they be in conflict then with each other? Because if we're going to restore by CME statistics versus what our restoration plan says, is there a potential for a conflict if we're saying, well, we're not going to abide by our plan, we're going to abide by what CME says?
I understand the clarification, and I think the way the straw proposal is written, it does not contemplate designing storm response or outage restoration around CME and CLID.
I just wanted to clarify where Moses was going is spot on. When we have an outage today at the feeder head, when we start restoration process, we start from the backbone and we work ourselves down to the end of the single phase lateral with 15 customers at the end of the fuse. None of that will ever change. We will always restore the most amount of customers that as fast as we can, but that will inherently continue to lead to those 15 customers at the end of that last fuse, at the end of that 5-mile extension of a distribution feeder, to always have longer restoration times and therefore longer CLIDs, higher CLID than the customers at the feeder head. And so now if we say, no, those customers should have the same level of reliability, well, that means maybe those 15 customers at the end of the line maybe get a secondary feed that is 6 miles long, so that they can always be served with the same level of reliability that the customers who are right next to a substation enjoy. The system is not designed that way. We are coming up with policies that are trying to redesign the distribution system, and there's substantial costs associated with that. And there is a lack of recognition in this PBR docket. There is no free lunch. That incremental performance will lead to incremental substantial investment. In fact, Dr. Nataku has gone through some of that analysis, and I would really like for us to really understand the significance of what we're talking about from a policy standpoint.
So we analyzed the two top circuits for 2023, the highest CME numbers, 12Y9 and 5R1. Those are the circuits. One has 126 customers that are CME 9. The other one has 91. So 200 customers between these two circuits that are CME 9. These circuits don't serve any disadvantaged or distressed municipalities. And the investment that we need there is in the order of $7 million. So this comes to about $87K a customer. We have 2,000 CME 7 customers across our territory. If we look at the top 10 towns, which again will probably be affluent based on our recent historical data, that's roughly 85% of our extended reliability annual budget. So we would essentially need to double our investment in the distribution system to accommodate both goals.
And to clarify what Dr. Natakwa is saying, that $85 million that we will have to spend to improve reliability for about 1,000 customers, again, by way of background, we have 1.3 million customers. We would spend $85 million to improve CME 9 customers, about 1,000 customers. That 85 million today pays for the entirety of enhanced tree removal, the entirety of hardening programs in Eversource, the entirety of our worst performing circuits. So we're basically saying, without providing any incremental funding, take stop doing hardening, stop doing the system reliability, SAIDI, stop going after those worst performing circuits and stop cutting trees. We just want you to focus on these 1,000 customers.
Mr. Chatterjee, is there not are they mutually exclusive, I guess is the question. Is it the case that you can only do one or the other, or is there,
right,
like what are the alternatives?
So here's the simple high level, just our high level understanding of if we targeted CME 9 customers today, we will have to spend $15 million. That $15 million, $15 or $20 million, if we stop spending on SAIDI, will result in a 5 to 6% reduction in SAIDI and SAIFI, right? So per year, right? So if we all collectively here make a decision that our SAIDI numbers are too good and we want to be the same as Mississippi or Louisiana and the rest of the nation, if we all collectively agree that we are okay with our system reliability degrading to where the rest of the nation is, that our customers have come to enjoy and benefit from, that's okay. We make that collective decision here because we are saying, go EDCs, go improve reliability for customers in Greenwich and Stanford and Ridgefield, and bring them at the same level as disadvantaged communities in the footprint. If that's what we're saying, that's what the proposal is saying. If that's certainly not the intent of the proposal, and the intent is to give the EDCs that incremental $15 and $20 million to also improve CME and CLIT, I think there will be no opposition, at least from Eversource. I would hate to speak from Avangrid's standpoint. Whatever that incremental funding is needed to improve whatever that incremental improvement in CME and CLIT, let's have that discussion before jumping the gun and setting a target and say, thou shalt. It takes years for us to make the investments and derive those benefits. But we're just jumping to the taking a shortcut and coming up with the coming up with an actual penalty-only disincentive imposed on the utility without the utility having an opportunity to make those investments.
I'm wondering if any others at the table have or even Eversource as well, an alternative to address the problem that Attorney Wheel highlighted of customers that don't receive the equal service, and outside of the idea of needing only an incremental investment as the answer, what alternatives does Eversource or others at the table see to ensure that those other customers who are not receiving the same level of service are getting a better level of service than they currently are?
A completely noble objective to have. And this is why we had proposed that CME and CLIT be used as a scorecard so that we can monitor over time and make those investments necessary to improve those CME and CLIT over time as decided by stakeholders, what that level of improvement should be. But we had deliberately, right, in the beginning of the docket said, first metrics then graduate to scorecards, then scorecards then graduate to PIMs after a baselining period. But regardless of what stakeholders have said, we still have a PIM for CME and CLIT.
Mr. Chatterjee, do you have an alternative proposal?
A scorecard.
A scorecard. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so from UI's perspective, I think we would agree with that. I would also note that CME and CLIT are now part of our worst performing circuit defining characteristics. So we will look to, where appropriate, bring investments to those circuits that are on the CME and CLID list. I would also say that when you look at variation year over year, you are likely to see a high degree of variation. So a circuit that appears one year may not appear the next year because of a specific instance or series of incidents that occurred potentially due to weather in a certain region. So having that, breadth of data over a longer period of time, I think would give us the opportunity to identify those genuine areas of concern that do need investment, consider the cost benefit of those investments, rather than the more, I think, reactionary approach of having this as a PIM, where we would be targeting to reduce absolute numbers year over year, for example.
Is it the case that, and just as a clarification, I think is my question is, did I hear you say that both the worst performing circuit list and the CME list are subject to that same variation year over year? Or is it the case that one of those has more consistent appearance of circuits?
I think the CME and CLID is going to be subject to higher volatility because you're looking at very small customer groups in most cases.
Thank you.
So this is correct. Those are edge cases. So it's a little bit different, more difficult to have them be consistent across years. For worst performing circuits, we take an average of 4 years. So I don't think REO 8 has a definition of how CME and CLID would be calculated across time, whether it's an average or straight up just 1 year of history.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And if I could add another comment there, I think it is really.
Well, yeah, just one point I want to make is, yes, you can. We'll take another comment and maybe one more, but I do want to move us on to any other scorecards or metrics that folks want to speak to before we get to the last piece of our agenda. So Mr. Donnelly, please, and then we'll move on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Kramer. I'll go quick. Important that we understand the data. What's the data telling us? Is there an issue? If there is, how do we address with CME and CLID? What are the underlying factors and causes of it? Is it because we are struggling to get tree consents and we are not able to do the trims that are necessary and required? Is that why that particular circuit, those particular customers are struggling? Those customers have then taken a decision that they don't want their trees trimmed on their line. They will refuse to give the consent. So how do we think about the equitable reliability to that select group of customers? And I'll end there, not to belabor it.
Thank you. Anything else on this point before we move on to the scorecards and metrics? Okay, Mr. Rams.
Moses Rams, Utility Workers. Attorney Wheel, just the comment that he made that you spoke to, I can assure you that we provide the level of excellent service to every one of our customers the same exact way. And you're hearing from a person who's in the field, and so is Jeff, and I can assure you, we do not distinguish any of our customers separately from that.
Thank you, Mr. Rams. All right, Ms. Lupoli, can you go back one slide to show us the portfolio one more time? Thank you very much. I wanted to put back up the scorecards and metrics that were also proposed in the straw proposal, to open the floor to see whether folks had additional comment on these scorecards and metrics, and we'll go from there. So I'll open. Dr. Nataku.
Thank you. There's no objections from Eversource on the scorecards and metrics. The metrics are already part of TDRP, so if we don't have any reporting changes, they should be all fine. The last note is Eversource, and I think UI would agree, Blue Sky City Safety has the makings of a PIM.
Thank you. Mr. Mulholland?
Yeah, no, similar, no concerns with the broader scorecards and metrics, and likewise the CDC Blue Sky metrics are strong contenders for PIMs.
Thank you. Mr. Tully, I wanted to come back to you on a comment you made earlier regarding storm restoration and ensuring that is something that's taking place equitably. I want you to hold that thought for our meeting coming up in July, because that is, as you know, one of the I think I can't recall offhand if it's a metric or a scorecard to look at restoration in different communities. And I wanted to come back to you to ask whether your comment was to suggest that we bring some of that metric design that was proposed for under the social equity outcome into the reliability outcome, or more of a broad comment?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. At this point, I don't have a position over where one lives, which is better. But I'm grateful that you're thinking about it now and just look forward to that conversation.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Then with that, I think we've made it through our 4 agenda topics for today. And so last on our list is simply to close out. And so Chairman Gillette, I'll turn it to you in just a moment for closing, but the only comment I had on closing today is to say that as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we are tentatively scheduled for another tech meeting. It's tech meeting number 6 on July 10th, wherein we intend to take up the remaining 5 priority outcomes and may also come back to some of the topics discussed today if necessary. So that's what you can expect for the next meeting. And as always, if you can stay tuned to the docket and the emails that you get from the service list for any further updates to the schedule. And with that, Chairman, there's nothing further from me.
Nothing further for me either. So thank you very much to everyone for being here and for your participation. And we will look forward to engaging with you at the next one. Thanks.